Lauren Steiner from the Robust Opposition, and I'm here with Ron Placone from...
Hello, it's Ron Placone here from Get Your News On with Ron and the Jimmy Dore Show, and good to see everybody.
And Craig Pasta Jardula.
Hello, how you doing? From the CONVO Couch.
And Fiorella Isabel.
Also from the CONVO Couch. Thank you guys very much for being here.
And we are here for night 2 of the corporate-free debate coverage. Tonight is the big match between our guy, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden. And the other people in the race we don't really care about, except I'm going to throw in a bunch of digs at Kamala because I know a lot of shit about her.
Yeah, don't we all?
But meanwhile...
what about Pete Buttigieg?
Buttigieg. I always refer everybody to the 10,000-word deep dive into Pete Buttigieg from... what's the name of that thing? Currentaffairs.org? I'll look it up and I'll put the link in the comments. But anyway, everything you want to know and probably don't want to know about Pete Buttigieg, but only in one language. So I wanted my guests to introduce themselves to talk about why we are going to be giving the commentary tonight. What is our background? So I'll start with myself. I am Lauren Steiner. I'm an activist and an organizer. I cut my teeth in the Occupy movement, which sort of radicalized me. I was always politically progressive, but I just got radical during Occupy and did a whole bunch of protests for the issues that I care about. And then when Bernie Sanders ran for president, I said, this guy is the candidate that if Occupy believed in electoral politics, this is the guy they would support. So I started up Los Angeles for Bernie, which was a very big Bernie group. And then I was a delegate for him, and then after that, I started my show, The Robust Opposition, in December of 2016, where I talk about activism, organizing, progressive candidates, progressive elected officials, and I interview authors and independent journalists, and you should tune in. It's on my Facebook page, where you're watching now, presumably. But if you're not, it's facebook.com/lauren.steiner.la. And I'll give you more info to find me later on in the show, but now we will go to Ron Placone. So what the hell are you doing up here, Ron?
Oh, what am I doing up here? I am enjoying some good food and some good company. I'm doing that. I'm definitely doing that. But I'm Ron Placone. I'm a comedian. I do some content creation stuff. You can check out my show, Get Your News On with Ron, over on youtube.com/Ron Placone. You can find all my tour dates at ronplacone.com, where I go on the Progressive Comedy Tour with Graham Elwood, and you can catch me on the Jimmy Dore Show, TYT, and a bunch of other spots that I try to get around. But I got interested in politics in 2004 when I was in college, and I wondered why we were in Iraq. It made zero sense to me. So I learned about the media reform movement, and then that was kind of the intro for me. Read Noam Chomsky and kind of just took it from there. Recently worked on a campaign for net neutrality. That's an issue near and dear to my heart. I'm pushing for municipal broadband in my neighborhood, which is taking the internet out of big cable's hands and putting it into the hands of cities and municipalities, and that's pretty much me.
Great.
Awesome, Ron. Thank you. I am Fiorella Isabel. I am part of the CONVO Couch with Pasta Jardula over here. We are also part of the MCSC network with Nico House. And I got into politics because of Bernie Sanders mainly. I did vote for Obama back then. I was always somewhat political, but I was never as activated as in 2015 when Bernie Sanders was out there speaking to the people. And I had moved from Florida to Los Angeles recently, and I have an acting background just like Pasta does. And I saw the disparity of wealth and everything that was happening with the shrinking middle class, and I could not ignore it. And I have become pretty much full-time activist, independent media journalist, organizer as well. I do some stuff here with the local community as far as homelessness goes. I'm very adamant about public housing and affordable housing, something that wasn't discussed yesterday that I hope comes across. And I'm also very passionate about no more war and about changing our very interventionist foreign policy. So I hope those topics get discussed further today.
Okay. So my name is Pasta Jardula from the CONVO Couch. Everything these guys said, pretty much kind of similar. Just got out in the streets, just love doing activism. Bernie Sanders, the 2016 campaign really ignited me, and just from hanging out with my friend Ron Placone, I decided to start my own show because we had a show in our kitchen every day. So we are here with you right now, and I just want to send a shout out really to everybody yesterday who, over 12,000 views on the MCSE network. Really, I mean, just telling the mainstream media to go shove it. And thank you all here for joining us today. We have a bunch of people in front of us.
Let's start the celebration.
We got this man over here who made some great tiki masala. It was awesome. And thank you for just joining our streams. We think it's awesome. We'd like to do this more often. And so it's Pasta from the Convo Couch.
Continue.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just let people know that the people that we have here tonight are here for a Bernie Debate Watch party. And this is part of the Bernie Sanders campaign organizing model, is to have as many of these debate watch parties in the country as possible. As you know, Bernie Sanders has 1 million volunteers signed up for the to volunteer on his campaign. So he is deploying those volunteers to do things like debate watch parties and phone banks, which we're going to be talking about later. After we do our post-debate analysis, we're going to be talking about the how you can get involved in doing a phone bank or a community canvas, putting people in the Burn app. This will all be explained later after our analysis. But it's very important that we do these corporate-free commentaries, because as anyone knows who watches this on CNN or MSNBC, you have to say, were they watching the same debate we were? You know, it's like we're looking for different things in this debate, and we see when we watch how they set it up for their favorite candidates. Like Elizabeth Warren got the vast majority of the questions last night, and actually it turned out, surprisingly, that Cory Booker had the most screen time if you read the reports. But what surprised me the most was that Tulsi actually did the best as far as in terms of who people thought won the debate. Now, we had some commentary last night in which we thought that Tulsi was not aggressive enough in terms of jumping in and being heard, since they were intentionally ignoring her, and they actually smeared her in a question where they brought up her, let Fiorella talk about it, because she has some more things to say about Tulsi.
Well, they brought up the Hezbollah situation only towards her, but the worst one was also the LGBT question, that they were like, why should we believe you now because of your past with the LGBTQ community, even though if you look at her legislation on her website, it literally tells you that she has 100% by the Human Rights Campaign, and she also has introduced and supported legislation directly impacting the LGBTQ community. But not only that, it's the fact that they only gave her those questions and nobody else. If they had given everybody else the gotcha questions, it would have seemed fair, but she had very minimal time compared to everybody else, save a couple other people. And the questions that were given to her were very much the gotcha questions, which I want to relate to tonight. I think Bernie Sanders is going to get something similar in relation to reparations and possibly the term socialism. Yeah.
And who's going to pay for it? You're going to hear that another time.
No, and it's worth reiterating. Tulsi Gabbard last night was the only person on the stage that got gotcha questions. It was an incredibly softball debate as far as the questions they were being asked. She was the only one.
Well, Beto got a little bit of the
No. He got attacked by the other people on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He got, and it wasn't even. I mean, it was justified because, and then he had to be asked follow-up questions because Beto O'Rourke was incapable of directly answering anything. He would not be able to tell you what color his tie was.
Everything
He did
was
not
a
directly
personal
answer
story,
anything.
right? Who I met on the campaign
Yeah.
trail, it's like I believe in personal stories. I think they're effective. We talked about it a little bit on the show last night, but I mean, he went overboard with those personal stories. And
when you're asked a direct question, 70% yay or nay, and you start babbling in Spanish for no apparent reason, it's because you got nothing to say.
yeah.
It's offensive. As a person that speaks Spanish, I mean, it's like, what are you doing? Like, what does this have to do with how you're going to solve the actual immigration issue? And Castro propped himself up by actually being specific about the issue at Beto's expense. And I think a lot of us unanimously agree that Beto is done after last night. I mean, he should just drop out.
I don't think he will, but I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's still going to be a little while, but I think he actually came in last.
Yeah.
I thought he did even worse than John Delaney,
Yeah.
who is John Delaney might as well be a hero and go run as a Republican.
Yeah.
Go be
Tim
a hero
Ryan
and
took
see
the
if you
worst.
can-
The
Tim
worst
Ryan
yesterday.
also-
Tim Ryan.
Well,
took
no,
the
Tim Ryan did pretty
Tim
bad.
Ryan- Tim
Ryan took a
I think
beating on that Tulsi question.
I think
Tim
Beto
Ryan,
was
Wow.
even worse.
Tim Ryan did very well in the beginning. I was kind of grooving on the fact that he was talking about the Rust Belt and, what people need to be concerned with. But then he just completely blew it when he got into that exchange with Tulsi. And that was the key moment of the night. Wouldn't you guys
Right.
agree?
Well, I was
Yeah.
going to say, I just hope Tim Ryan's for free college because he got a free education on the air from Tulsi. Right? Huh? Yeah.
See,
Yeah,
that's-
there we go.
Thumbs
There we
up.
go.
That's why we have comedians on this show, folks.
That's why we
See?
love it.
See, Jimmy Dore, eat your heart out. We got Ron Lacone here.
I got a question for you guys.
Jimmy's actually at the
In
debate.
Miami.
He's in
He's
Miami.
in Miami.
He actually
yeah.
got seats.
Yeah, yeah.
Did he get in as a guest
He got
or as,
in,
as-
yeah.
or as a
Yeah.
host or as
We
a
saw
media?
pictures.
How did he get in?
Oh,
as press?
I'm not sure, but
You
yeah, I
know,
know he was sitting
I think he
there.
got in as a guest. Who
Yeah.
knows? Do you guys think that somebody's going to, maybe hopefully PDB, his campaign manager tells him, hey, man, don't speak Spanish tonight. Please,
He wasn't
don't
the
speak
only
Spanish.
one, though. That's the thing.
Well,
Booker did it.
Castro did it too. And
But Castro, I mean, he gets away with it because
he
Hispanic.
speaks it properly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying.
But I mean, just seeing Booker and Beto, and that's why Marianne Williamson let out that tweet. I'm sure you guys all read it.
No.
I think I need to learn Spanish by
Oh, yeah.
9 p.m. tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it got a
Yeah.
lot of traction.
Touche.
Yeah, yeah.
Touche.
Somebody tweeted, and I wish I could give the person credit, but somebody tweeted in a reply to one of my tweets, like, I'm going to give $250 to the first person who speaks Klingon. Wish I could give
What-
the credit to that person. But
Speaking of giving $250, what do you think about the fact that Andrew Yang, who's going to be on tonight, has just put forth another thing that he's giving $1,000 a month to the next 100 people who send him $1?
I saw that on his Twitter. I don't know. Was there a winner? Was that decided?
I mean, I don't know. It's like I tweeted back, I said, that may be legal, but it sure looks like you're trying to buy votes there. You know? What do you think of that, guys?
Well, generally, my thoughts on a UBI, I'm not completely against the idea. I just think it needs to be implemented the right way. I think it needs to also accompany a very heavy rent control to be effective. As far as his idea goes, I mean, he plans on pulling away from social programs to pay for it. So,
Yeah, so it's
so
a
I'm not
wash.
for his way of instituting a UBI. There's some ideas he has that I like, but the UBI idea as he has it is not one of them. And I'd prefer a federal jobs guarantee. And I think
Right.
with all the issues we're facing with climate change, with the desperate need for infrastructure, with the desperate need for a Green New Deal, we can totally have a jobs guarantee in this country. So I'd rather focus on that.
That's what Bernie's kind of implementing, an economic bill of rights, similar to what FDR had back in the day, where he's putting like a federal jobs guarantee. The Green New Deal also talks about a federal jobs guarantee. We're talking about affordable housing. So that in a way, if we can implement rent control and we can implement a living wage, that way you can have UBI. UBI ultimately, in my opinion, I agree with you, doesn't work in a capitalist system because that can be offset by taxing the wrong people. And eventually you're not really giving people money. You're just kind of like replacing where this money is coming from. And that's
Yeah.
the danger with UBI. But it's something to think about, I think, more as automation comes into play. How are we going to provide new jobs? We kind of talked about it yesterday between labor and green tech. How are we going to connect those two? Because a lot of the jobs in big oil, the reason the unions are backing them is because of these people supporting their jobs, and
Yeah.
they need to make money.
And this is reminiscent of Bill Clinton's welfare reform because, yes, a lot of people would rather work than collect the cash. But what happened was when they got jobs, they lost their transportation allowance, they lost their health assistance, they lost their food stamps, and they lost their child care. So all the other things that they had, it ended up becoming a wash because the little job that they had then had to go and pay for all that. So
Right.
I want to just go, before we talk about what we're expecting in tonight's debate, I would just like to review everyone to have an opportunity to say the key moments for them from last night's debate. I know I have a few, but why don't we start with you, Pasta?
I mean, it's hard not to say that Tulsi moment of going after Ryan was the key moment. I think it was her best moment. But I did like the way she also answered, and not to be a Tulsi sycophant, but I'm gonna be. But I like the way she also answered the Iran question when it came to Hezbollah, because she really took control. And we talked about this. Me and Johnny Tsunami did a stream about it a couple weeks ago, and we said it's key for Tulsi not to overextend herself, not to go out too quick, to just sit back, play the rope-a-dope, and when the opportunity presents itself, take the shot. And I think she did it yesterday beautifully. I think she came out way on top. So for me, I think I played that clip about 36 times last night going to sleep of her just beating down Ryan. So I'm going to stick with the best moment since I got a chance to talk first.
All right.
Oh,
We
say
got-
hi to Jimmy.
Jimmy?
Hi, Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy.
There he is.
Say
Tell
hi
me-
to Tulsi.
If you see Nira, tell her what we all think of her.
Jimmy, put suntan lotion on over there. It gets really hot in Miami.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
gonna.
Really hot. And the Cuban coffee, delicious.
All right, Fee, what was your memorable moment?
Absolutely, 100% Tulsi, but not because I like Tulsi, but because of the fact that she really put foreign policy on the map, and she was kind of educating the American populace as she was educating Ryan. Because when he was blaming the Taliban, she said, actually, no, it was Al-Qaeda who did this. And a lot of the Republicans actually thought she sounded kind of poised. And I think that's very interesting because if we look outside of our biases, right? The Republican Party has one thing. They're very policy, factual, numbers driven. They always want to know how things are paid for and et cetera. So I think Tulsi being very stoic and very like specific actually garnered her some praise from the independent and the Republican Party, which is something that you would want in somebody in the general. Whether it's someone as a VP or someone in the cabinet, you kind of want someone that can speak to people who they may not necessarily agree with, and that's always been her thing.
Great.
So
Ron?
The Tim Ryan moment was great. Yeah, Tulsi's moment with Tim Ryan was great. I thought there were a couple little subtle tells too in some of the candidates, like Amy Klobuchar, and I don't remember the exact quote, but when immigration came up, Amy Klobuchar said something along the lines of, hey, we need immigrants. Some of them might make it to the 1%. Isn't that neat? Which is basically something Republicans say.
Yeah.
So, when you heard some of her talking points, when you heard John Delaney talk about healthcare, which was absolutely disgusting, he sounded like a Republican. When you hear Beto talk about basically anything, you're just kind of thinking, why don't all these people just join the GOP already? Like, this is absolutely ridiculous. They don't belong in a Democratic debate. So I enjoyed some of those tells. What else did I kind of like? I liked the dunking. I liked it when Castro dunked on Beto. I liked it when Tulsi dunked on Ryan, who, by the way, when that was happening, he kind of looked like he had just woken up. That guy's he's like a human nap. But
I know. Trump can now call him low energy. Remember how he called Jeb Bush? We should come up with some Trumpian names for these people. I think that would be...
well, I got for Beto O'Rourke, I call him stand on something, stand for nothing.
Yeah.
That's all I got so far, though.
Well, I have my famous hashtag for Kamala. I call her counterfeit Kamala with a K. And
I like that.
yeah, because she's totally false. I mean, she's a fraud. The way she's portraying herself, and we could talk about this later, is not at all what her record is. But for me, I have become the de facto defender of Elizabeth Warren in the progressive community, even though I will state again, for anyone out there, I am supporting Bernie Sanders. I supported him in 2016. I am supporting him in 2020. But I'm also a big fan of Elizabeth Warren, and I don't think she deserves the smears that she's been getting. I think there are problems with her. I don't think she can beat Trump. I don't necessarily think that she's going to be as much of a fighter as Bernie, but some of the other things I think are BS smears, and we can go through them later. But right now, I just want to say that last night, I think she acquitted herself beautifully when she came out for Medicare for All, when she came out against the private insurance industry, and she and de Blasio, who also did a good job last night, staking out the far left position until, of course, he said Russia, which was strange.
her plan doesn't eliminate private insurance, though, at all. Just so you know.
Okay,
we can discuss that later.
Okay, when are we going to discuss that?
I don't know. I think it'd be great to have it.
You
No.
got-
If you look at her plan,
Changes their mind
it
every
doesn't.
day.
It doesn't eliminate private
Okay,
insurance. It's the
first
same
of all-
plan as Bernie's and Jayapal's, which still has private insurance for cosmetic surgery and things like that.
Okay,
It's
first
similar,
of all,
but
you
it's not even
can't
as-
get private insurance. Private insurance does not cover cosmetic surgery because it's elective. So
Right.
basically,
That's why you would say
and
that.
Tulsi, I'd like to find out why Tulsi didn't raise her hand talking about.
That's exactly why, because that's her. She's literally mirroring Jayapal's plan and Bernie Sanders' plan. She co-sponsored it. She didn't just go ahead and make her own bill
So
like
did
Warren
Elizabeth
did.
Warren, and I want to tell you something
But she
about
made her own bill. So-
Elizabeth Warren's bill is called the Health Care Bill of Rights, and what it is, it's protections and cost reductions for people who have insurance. And my whole spiel on that is, look, Bernie voted to save the ACA, and a lot of people, if it wasn't Bernie, you would be smeared. If it was Elizabeth Warren who voted to save the ACA, you would say, oh, she's voted to save the ACA, so she's got to be terrible, or she must not
No,
support
that was in that moment. That was understood. That was
Right.
what people had to do.
Well, look.
Even Dennis Kucinich had to
As
do
I
that.
said last night, and I was actually wrong, I said for 40 years presidents have been trying to get single payer, and I was wrong because it started with FDR, and that's like 80 years presidents have been trying to get single payer. So in the meanwhile, there is absolutely nothing wrong with Elizabeth Warren
right.
having a bill to, if we are stuck with private insurance, and even if Bernie's bill takes years, do you think Bernie's just going to snap his fingers and get it passed just because Bernie becomes the president? No, it's not going to happen. Even Bernie says, it's not me, it's us. We need to create a mass movement, and we need to pressure our legislators to vote for it.
Absolutely.
That could take a long time. So in the meanwhile, if she has an incremental bill that makes things better for people, I don't have a problem with it.
There's no middle ground, Lauren. People are dying. People can't afford their
there-
medication. If you start accepting incrementalism middle ground at this point, they're going to take that you're going to accept it and they're not going to do it.
Absolutely
If you don't
right.
fight for it, they're not going to do it.
1000%.
Right. Well,
right.
why do you think that she's not going to fight for it? She said last night what she wants.
Her
Well, I
record.
think a criticism of both her and de Blasio that I think is very fair is questioning their sincerity. Elizabeth Warren has backpedaled many times. Often with her, it's kind of like one step forward and then one step back. Oh, she sponsored this drug bill with Bernie. That's really cool. Then the military budget, one step back. And then, she's for Medicare for all. Then she's not. So I think it's fair to say her sincerity is in question.
Yeah, but you can't just look at how they vote because they could be frauds.
Well, I'm also basing it off what she said.
Lila Garrett, whose show I guest on often, she's 92 years old, bless her heart. She still does Connect the Dots on KPFK. She actually said to me that the only one she was supporting was Kirsten Gillibrand. I'm like, what? And she said, well, she's the only one of the candidates, and this was before Bernie entered the race, who did not vote for that defense bill. So we know that Kirsten Gillibrand is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and she is just making these votes to, burnish her credentials. Similarly, Jay Inslee reversed his position on this LNG export terminal that he had approved because it doesn't look very good for someone who's running his entire campaign on climate change, right? So I feel like you have to look at the totality of the person's work, and that includes, for me, with Elizabeth Warren, before she even became a politician. So I feel she has characteristics like Bernie of
gotta go to the
compassion, consistent,
Yeah.
authentic, and that's why I like her.
We gotta go to the debate.
I'm still Bernie.
Okay, she's awful on foreign affairs. Here's the debate. Elizabeth Warren is
We
terrible.
got
haven't
4
started
minutes.
that.
We got 4 minutes.
Okay, did you want to say what
I
you
want-
expect to
I-
see on
yeah,
this?
what-
we have
what-
not talked about is Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Zerlina, what do you think? We saw when she grilled Kavanaugh,
Right,
when
right.
she
Like I
grilled
called them, when
How
did
is
you
she
last
gonna
beat your
handle being
wife,
in the hot
Bernie?
seat tonight?
Look,
It's like a question you can't come back from.
The challenge of high
We have to have a
expectations.
drink.
And
We're going to
so
play a
she is,
drinking
according
game
to the
here.
way people
Every time they ask
the
one of those
number
questions, we're going to
candidate
take
that
a
people
sip
want
of
to
our
learn more
wine.
about,
the
right?
only
So
reason-
people
I
get
got a
interested
message
in
for you,
more
Lauren.
about who she is,
Somebody
her
says
background.
that,
They know she was a prosecutor.
MSNBC is already shilling for Elizabeth Warren. You don't have to do it. So
All right, well,
who
you
said
know,
that?
hey, to that somebody
Jimmy
who just...
Dore?
yeah.
Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore.
Hey, I don't know if I was supposed to say that.
Yeah,
He
well,
goes, Lauren, they already got people shilling. I stuttered when I was saying it because I didn't know how
all
to say
right,
it. but-
Jimmy, you know, we got some talking to do here.
Yeah. We get thumbs up, Jim. Thumbs up.
You've been in this living room too many times to diss me like that,
It's okay. We'll.
You know what I'm expecting tonight? I'm expecting the Kamala Harris, even though I'm not crazy about the woman, to kind of emulate the same performance Cory Booker did last night, which is a lot of people don't understand, the policy deep down inside. They don't understand the history. So she can pretty much platitude and bullshit her way out to a good performance and get some trends on Google the way Cory Booker did. So that's what
I
I'm
just
expecting
hope
for today.
she doesn't talk as annoying as Cory Booker does. Every time Cory Booker speaks, it's like that person in high school drama class who's trying too hard.
Yeah, that
She's
good,
worse.
good.
So annoying.
No,
he's
Kamala,
so annoying.
Kamala Harris is like Thurston Howell III. You know, for those of you who are baby boomers like me and you remember Gilligan's Island, she talks with that Long Island lockjaw and shows just exactly what kind of socialite she is. Is that good?
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's not bad.
Kamala?
Biden,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
good.
Biden is going to
What
make
about Joe
himself.
Biden? Yeah.
He's going to make himself look pretty bad. I think.
I hope he falls over.
I don't think we need to say much on him. I think he's gonna do it for himself.
They put him and Bernie
Joe
right next to
Biden
each
is for
other.
sure going to make himself look bad. The reason being, there will be a microphone in front of his face.
Face,
I'm
exactly.
calling it now. Calling it now.
And look who he's surrounded by. He's got Bernie's got Biden on his right, Kamala on his left. Wow. It's time, right?
Here we go,
this?
guys.
We going?
Drink up.
Okay. Let's go. Thank you for coming. All right, out there.
This group of wealthy donors, that things would be exactly the same. And a lot of people took that to interpret that they wouldn't be paying more money, they wouldn't be subject to a wealth tax that a lot of the other candidates are pushing for. And that's where I think someone like Bernie Sanders has the opportunity to shine, at least in a certain age group potentially, because again, he does have this multifaceted approach to building the economy with his student debt plan, with his wealth tax. And I think that he is unparalleled on the stage in terms of offering that.
Do you think it's going to be more important for the candidates to address perhaps some of their for America?
I think they need to show how they're better than Donald Trump and how they can defeat him. Simple.
So tonight is about Trump. All right, guys, thank you so much. And this is the moment we've been waiting for. We are about to see the candidates take the stage. Stay right here because we are headed straight to Miami.
All right.
Wait, are they having a commercial?
Yep, they're having a quick commercial, so we're
Oh,
back.
we're already
Live
on?
stream. See what I'm saying?
All right, so we're back, folks, and
We were talking about Joe Biden.
Yeah, Joe Biden. So how many gaffes is he going to make?
What do you guys think?
So Joe Biden's won with the public position and the private
back.
position, right?
They're back.
Oh, okay.
From 10 candidates and now 10 more take the stage.
And again tonight, we'll be joined in the questioning by our colleagues, Jose Diaz-Balart, Chuck Todd, and Rachel Maddow.
The candidates are in position, so let's get started.
Tonight, round two, Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, former Vice President Joe Biden, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, California Senator Kamala Harris, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, California Congressman Eric Swalwell, author Marianne Williamson, and former tech executive Andrew Yang. From NBC News, Decision 2020, the Democratic Candidates Debate. Live from the Adrian Arsht Performing Arts Center in Miami, Florida.
Spirited audience here tonight in the Arts Center and across America tonight. We continue this spirited debate about the future of the country, how to tackle our most pressing problems, and getting to the heart of the biggest issues in this Democratic primary.
Tonight, we're going to talk about health care, immigration. We're also going to dive into the economy, jobs, climate change as well.
And some quick rules of the road before we begin, and they may sound familiar. 20 candidates qualified for this first debate. As we said, we heard from 10 last night, and we'll hear from 10 more tonight. The breakdown for each night was selected at random. The candidates will have 60 seconds to answer, 30 seconds for any follow-ups.
And because of the large field of candidates, not every person is going to be able to weigh in on every topic. But over the course of the next 2 hours, we will hear from everyone.
And we love our audience, but we'd like to ask them to keep their reactions to a minimum, and we're not going to hold back in making sure the candidates stick to time. So with that business taken care of, let's get to it. And we're going to start today with Senator Sanders. Good evening to you. You've called for big new government benefits like universal health care and free college. In a recent interview, you said you suspected that Americans would be, quote, delighted to pay more taxes for things like that. My question to you is, will taxes go up for the middle class in a Sanders administration? And if so, how do you sell that to voters?
Well, you're quite right. We have a new vision for America. And at a time when we have 3 people in this country owning more wealth than the bottom half of America, while 500,000 people are sleeping out on the streets today, we think it is time for change, real change. And by that I mean that health care, in my view, is a human right. And we have got to pass a Medicare for all single-payer system. Under that system, by the way, vast majority of the people in this country will be paying significantly less for health care than they are right now. I believe that education is the future for this country. And that is why I believe that we must make public colleges and universities tuition-free and eliminate student debt. And we do that by placing a tax on Wall Street. Every proposal that I have brought forth is fully paid for.
Senator Sanders, I'll give you 10 seconds just to answer the very direct question. Will you raise taxes for the middle class in a Sanders administration?
People who have health care under Medicare for all will have no premiums, no deductibles, no co-payments, no out-of-pocket expenses. Yes, they will pay more in taxes, but less in health care for what they get.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bennett, we're going to get to everybody, I promise, but let me just, Senator Biden, promise everybody's going to get in here, promise. Vice President Biden, Senator Sanders, as you know, has been calling for a revolution. Recently, in remarks to a group of wealthy donors, as you were speaking about the problem of income inequality in this country, you said, we shouldn't, quote, demonize the rich. You said, nobody has to be punished. No one's standard of living would change. Nothing would fundamentally change. What did you mean by that?
What I meant by that is, look, Donald Trump thinks Wall Street built America. Ordinary middle-class Americans build America. My dad used to have an expression. He said, Joe, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's being able to look your kid in the eye and say everything's going to be okay. Too many people who are in the middle class and poor have had the bottom fall out under this proposal. What I'm saying is that we've got to be straightforward. We have to make sure we understand that to return dignity to the middle class, they have to have insurance that is covered and they can afford it. They have to make sure that we're in a situation where there's continuing education and they're able to pay for it. And they have to make sure that they're able to breathe air that is clean and they have water that they can drink. Look, Donald Trump has put us in a horrible situation. We do have enormous income inequality. And the one thing I agree on is we can make massive cuts in the $1.6 trillion in tax loopholes out there, and I would be going about eliminating Donald Trump's tax cuts for the wealthy.
Vice President Biden, thank you. Senator Harris. There's a lot of talk in this primary about new government benefits, such as student loan cancellation, free college, health care, and more. Do you think that Democrats have a responsibility to explain how they will pay for every proposal they make along those lines?
Well, let me tell you something. I hear that question, but where was that question when the Republicans and Donald Trump passed a tax bill that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations in this country, contributing at least $1 trillion to the debt of America, which middle-class families will pay for one way or another? Working families need support and need to be lifted up, and frankly, this economy is not working for working people. For too long, the rules have been written in the favor of the people who have the most and not in favor of the people who work the most, which is why I am proposing that we change the tax code. So for every family that is making less than $100,000 a year, they will receive a tax credit that they can collect up to $500 a month, which will make all the difference between those families being able to get through the end of the month with dignity and with support or not. And on day one, I will repeal that tax bill that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America.
Senator Harris, thank you. Governor Hickenlooper, let me get you in on this. You've warned that Democrats will lose in 2020 if they embrace socialism, as you put it. You were booed at the California Democratic Convention when you said that. Only one candidate on this stage, Senator Sanders, identifies himself as a democratic socialist. What are the policies or positions of your opponents that you think are veering towards socialism?
Well, I think that the bottom line is if we don't clearly define that we are not socialists, the Republicans are going to come at us every way they can and call us socialists. And if you look at the Green New Deal, which I admire the sense of urgency and how important it is to do climate change, I'm a scientist, but we can't promise every American a government job. If you want to get universal health care coverage, I believe that health care is a right and not a privilege. But you can't expect to eliminate private insurance for 180 million people, many of whom don't want to give it up. In Colorado, we brought businesses and nonprofits together. We got to near universal health care coverage. We were the first state in America to bring the environmental community and the oil and gas industry to aggressively address methane emissions. And we were also the first place to expand reproductive rights on a scale basis, and we reduced teen pregnancy by 54%. We've done the big progressive things that people said couldn't be done. I've done what pretty much everyone else up here is still talking about doing.
Governor, thank you. Senator Sanders, I'll give you a chance to weigh in here. What is your response to those who say nominating a socialist would re-elect Donald Trump?
Well, I think the responses that the last poll I saw had us 10 points ahead of Donald Trump, because the American people understand that Trump is a phony, that Trump is a pathological liar and a racist, and that he lied to the American people during his campaign. He said he was going to stand up for working families. Well, President Trump, you're not standing up for working families when you try to throw 32 million people off the health care that they have, and that 83% of your tax benefits go to the top 1%. That's how we beat Trump. We expose him for the fraud that he is.
I disagree with both their perspectives. The debate we're having in our party right now is confusing, because the truth is there's a big difference between capitalism on the one hand and greed on the other. And so all the things that we're trying to change is when companies care more about profits when they do about people. So if you're talking about ending gun violence, it's the greed of the NRA and the gun manufacturers that make any progress impossible. It's the greed of the insurance companies and the drug companies when we want to try to get health care as a right and not a privilege. So there need not be disagreement in the party, because in truth, we want healthy capitalism. We don't want corrupted capitalism.
Thank you. I want to be fair to all the candidates. Thank you. Senator Bennett, you have said, quote, it's possible to write policy proposals that have no basis in reality. You might as well call them candy. Were you referring to any candidate or proposal in particular when you said that?
Was that directed to me?
Yes, that was your quote.
That sounded like me. Thank you.
It was you.
I appreciate it. Well, look, first of all, I agree completely with Bernie about what the fundamental challenge we're facing as a country is. 40 years of no economic growth for 90% of the American people. 160,000 families in the top 0.1% have the same wealth as the bottom 90%, and we've got the worst income inequality that we've had in 100 years. Where I disagree is on his solution on Medicare Medicare for all. You know, I have proposed getting to universal health care, which we need to do. It is a right. Health care is a right. We need to get to universal health care. I believe the way to do that is by finishing the work we started with Obamacare and creating a public option that every family and every person in America can make a choice for their family about whether they want a public option, which for them would be like having Medicare for all, or whether they want to keep their private insurance. I believe we will get there much more quickly if we do that.
But wait,
Bernie, if I could just finish, Bernie mentioned that the taxes that we would have to pay. Because of those taxes, Vermont rejected Medicare for all.
Senator,
and we should
we are going to talk about health care at length, Senator, but for the moment, my colleague will say, once I continue the question.
I wrote the part in Senator Sanders' bill. I wrote the part in Senator Sanders' bill that is the transition, which merges what the two senators said. Because the truth is, if you have a buy-in over a 4 or 5 year period, you move us to single payer more quickly.
Senator, we will get to this. We will get to this.
I understand.
Before we do, I want to say hello and good evening, buenas noches to Mayor Buttigieg.
Buenas noches, gracias de invitarnos.
Gusto en verlo, caballero. Many of your colleagues on stage support free college. You do not. Why not?
Sure. So college affordability is personal for us. Chasten and I have 6-figure student debt. I believe in reducing student debt. It's logical to me that if you can refinance your house, you ought to be able to refinance your student debt. I also believe in free college for low and middle income students for whom cost could be a barrier. I just don't believe it makes sense to ask working class families to subsidize even the children of billionaires. I think the children of the wealthiest Americans can pay at least a little bit of tuition. And while I want tuition costs to go down, I don't think we can buy down every last penny for them. Now, there's something else that doesn't get talked about in the college affordability debate. Yes, it needs to be more affordable in this country to go to college. It also needs to be more affordable in this country to not go to college. You should be able to live well, afford rent, be generous to your church and Little League, whether you went to college or not. That's one of many reasons we need to raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour.
Jose, I've got $100,000 in student loan debt myself.
Let me get to you.
We can't count on the people who've been in government for the last 30 years who were around when this problem was created to be the ones to solve it. It's going to be the next generation, the 40 million of us who can't start a family, can't take a good idea and start a business, and can't buy our first home. This is the generation that's going to be able to solve student loan debt. This generation is ready to lead.
Mr. Yang, your signature policy is to give every adult in the United States $1,000 a month, no questions asked.
That's right.
I think that's like $3.2 trillion a year. How would you do that?
Sorry?
How would you do that?
Oh, so it's difficult to do if you have companies like Amazon, trillion-dollar tech companies paying literally zero in taxes while they're closing 30% of our stores. Now, we need to put the American people in position to benefit from all these innovations in other parts of the economy. And if we had a value-added tax at even half the European level, it would generate over $800 billion in new revenue, which combined with the money in our hands, it would be the trickle-up economy from our people, families, and communities up. We would spend the money and it would circulate through our regional economies and neighborhoods, creating millions of jobs, making our families stronger and healthier. We'd save money on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room health care, and just the value gains from having a stronger, healthier, mentally healthier population would increase GDP by $700 billion. This is the move that we have to make, particularly as technology is now automating away millions of American jobs. It's why Donald Trump is our president today, that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And we're about to do the same thing to millions of retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, truck driving jobs, and on through the economy.
Mr. If I get you understand a little bit better, so you're saying $1,000 a month for everyone over 18, but a value-added tax, so you can spend that $1,000 on value-added tax?
Well, the value-added tax would end up, you'd still be increasing the buying power of the bottom 94% of Americans. You have to spend a lot of money for a mild value-added tax to eat up $12,000 a year per individual. So for the average family with 2 or 3 adults, it'd be $24,000 to $36,000 a year.
Okay, Congressman Swalwell, I want to talk a little bit about what Mr. Yang is talking about, and you just actually mentioned it. Many Americans are worried that things like self-driving cars, robots, drones, artificial intelligence will cost them their jobs. What would you do to help people get the skills they need to adapt to this new world?
We must always be a country where technology creates more jobs than it displaces. And I've seen the anxiety across America where the manufacturing floors go from 1,000 to 100 to 1. So we have to modernize our schools, value the teachers who prepare our kids, wipe the student debt from any teacher that goes into a community that needs it, invest in America's communities, especially where the best exports are people who move away to get skills. But Jose, I was 6 years old when a presidential candidate came to the California Democratic Convention and said, it's time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans. That candidate was then Senator Joe Biden. Joe Biden was right when he said it was time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans 32 years ago. He's still right today. If we're going to solve the issues of automation, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issues of climate chaos, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issue of student loan debt, pass the torch. If we're going to end gun violence for families who are fearful of sending their kids to school, pass the torch.
Vice President, would you like to sing a torch song?
I would. I'm still holding on to that torch. I want to make it clear to you, look, the fact of the matter is what we have to do is make sure that everybody is prepared better to go on to educate for an education. The fact is that's why I propose us focusing on schools that are in distress. That's why I think we should triple the amount of money we spend for Title I schools. That's why I think we should have universal pre-K. That's why I think every single person who graduates from high school, 65 out of 100 now, need something beyond high school. And we should provide for them to be able to get that education. That's why there should be free community college, cutting in half the cost of college. That's why we should be in a position where we do not have anyone have to pay back a student debt when they get out. They're making less than $25,000 a year. Their debt is frozen, no interest payment until they get beyond that. We can't put people in a position where they aren't able to go on and move on. And so, folks, there's a lot we can do, but we have to make continuing education available for everyone so that everyone can compete in the 21st century. We're not doing that now.
Senator Sanders.
As the youngest guy on the stage, I feel like I probably ought to contribute to the generational conversation.
As part of Joe's generation,
I'm all for
part of Joe's generation. Let me respond.
Before we move
the
on
issue, if I may say, is not generational.
Let's please.
The
Senator
issue
Sanders,
is not generational. The issue is who has the guts to take on Wall Street, to take on the fossil fuel industry, to take on the big money interests who have unbelievable influence over the economic and political life of this country.
These issues haven't gotten better over
Senator Harris, I'm so sorry. We will let all of you speak. Senator Harris. Senator Harris. Please, we will let you all speak. Senator Harris.
We can't afford to wait for evolution on these issues.
Hey, guys, you know what? America does not want to witness a food fight. They want to know how we're going to put food on their table. Yes? Part of the issue that is at play in America today, and we've all been traveling around the country, I certainly have, I'm meeting people who are working 2 and 3 jobs. You know, this president walks around talking about and flouting his great economy, right? My great economy, my great economy. You ask him, well, how are you measuring this greatness of this economy of yours? And he talks about the stock market. Well, that's fine if you own stocks. So many families in America do not. You ask them, how are you measuring the greatness of this economy of yours? And they point to the jobless numbers and the unemployment numbers. Well, yeah, people in America are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. So when we talk about jobs, let's be really clear. In our America, no one should have to work more than 1 job to have a roof over their head and food on the table.
Thank you very much, Senator.
We've all expressed an interest in talking about health care. So let's talk about health care. And this is going to be a show of hands question. We asked a question about health care last night that spurred a lot of discussion, as you know. We're going to do it again now. Many people watching at home have health insurance of their employer. Who here would abolish their private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan? Yeah. All right. Christian Gillibrand, Senator Gillibrand.
Yeah, so no, it's my turn.
Go ahead.
So this is a very important issue. So the plan that Senator Sanders and I and others support, Medicare for All, is how you get to single payer. but it has a buy-in transition period, which is really important. In 2005, when I ran for Congress in a 2-to-1 Republican district, I actually ran on Medicare for All, and I won that 2-to-1 Republican district twice. And the way I formulated it was simple. Anyone who doesn't have access to insurance they like, they could buy in at a percentage of income they could afford. So that's what we put into the transition period for our Medicare for All plan. I believe we need to get to universal health care as a right and not a privilege to single payer. The quickest way you get there is you create competition with the insurers. God bless the insurers. If they want to compete, they can certainly try. But they've never put people over their profits, and I doubt they ever will. So what will happen is people will choose Medicare, you will transition, we will get to Medicare for All, and then your step to single payer is so short. I would make it an earned benefit, just like Social Security, so that you buy in your whole life. It is always there for you, and it's permanent, and it's universal.
Senator, your time is up. I want to put that same question to Mayor Buttigieg.
Yeah, we've taught, look, everybody who says Medicare for all, every person in politics who allows that phrase to escape their lips has a responsibility to explain how you're actually supposed to get from here to there. Now, here's how I would do it. It's very similar. I would call it Medicare for all who want it. You take something like Medicare, a flavor of that, you make it available on the exchanges, people can buy in, and then if people like us are right, that will be not only a more inclusive plan, but a more efficient plan than any of the corporate answers out there, then it will be a very natural glide path to the single-payer environment. But let's remember, even in countries that have outright socialized medicine, like England, even there's still a private sector. That's fine. It's just that for our primary care, we can't be relying on the tender mercies of the corporate system. This one's very personal for me. I started out this year dealing with the terminal illness of my father. I make decisions for a living. And nothing could have prepared me for the kind of decisions our family faced. But the thing we had going for us was that we never had to make those decisions based on whether it was going to bankrupt our family because of Medicare. And I want every family to have that same freedom to do what is medically right, not live in financial fear.
Your time is complete. Vice President Biden, I want to put the question to you. You were one of the architects of Obamacare. So where do we go from here?
Well, look, this is very personal to me. When my wife and daughter were killed in an automobile accident, my two boys were really very badly injured. I couldn't imagine what it would be like had I not had adequate health care available immediately. And then when my son came home from Iraq after a year, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he was given months to live. I can't fathom what would have happened if, in fact, they said, by the way, the last 6 months of your life, you're on your own. We're cutting off. You've used up your time. The fact of the matter is that the quickest, fastest way to do it is build on Obamacare, to build on what we did. And secondly, to make sure that everyone does have an option. Everyone, whether they have private insurance, employer insurance, or no insurance, they, in fact, could buy in the exchange to a Medicare-like plan. And the way to do that, we can do it quickly. Look, urgency matters. There's people right now facing what I faced and what we faced without any of the help I had. We must move now. I'm against any Democrat who opposes, takes down Obamacare, and any Republican who wants to get rid of Obamacare.
Let me turn to Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders, you basically want to scrap the private health insurance system as we know it and replace it with a government-run plan. None of the states that have tried something like that, California, Vermont, New York, has struggled with it, have been successful. If politicians can't make it work in those states, how would you implement it on a national level? How does this work?
Listen, I find it hard to believe that every other major country on earth, including my neighbor 50 miles north of me, Canada, somehow has figured out a way to provide health care to every man, woman, and child, and in most cases, they're spending 50% per capita what we are spending. Let's be clear. Let us be very clear. The function of health care today, from the insurance and drug company perspective, is not to provide quality care to all in a cost-effective way. The function of the healthcare system today is to make billions in profits for the insurance companies. And last year, if you could believe it, while we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, and I will lower prescription drug prices in half in this country, top 10 companies made $69 billion in profit. They will spend hundreds of millions of dollars lying to the American people, telling us why we cannot have a Medicare for all single-payer
I just have to follow up there. How do you implement it on a national level? How do you implement it on a national level, given the fact it's not succeeded in other states that have tried?
I will tell you how we'll do it. We'll do it the way real change has always taken place, whether it was the labor movement, the civil rights movement, or the women's movement. We will have Medicare for all when tens of millions of people are prepared to stand up and tell the insurance companies and the drug companies that their day is gone, that health care is a human right, not something to make huge profits off of.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Williamson. Ms. Williamson, this is a question for you. Excuse me. I'm addressing the question, Ms. Williamson. We've been talking a lot about access to health insurance, but for many Americans, their most pressing concern is the high cost of health care. How would you lower the cost of prescription drugs?
Well, first of all, the government should never have made the deal with the big pharma that they couldn't negotiate. That was just part of the regular corruption by which multinational corporations have their way with us. You know, I want to say that while I agree with, I'm with Senator Bennett and others, but I agree with almost everything here. I'll tell you one thing. It's really nice if we've got all these plans, but if you think we're going to beat Donald Trump by just having all these plans, you got another thing coming. Because he didn't win by saying he had a plan. He won by simply saying, make America great again. We've got to get deeper than just these superficial fixes, as important as they are. Even if we're just talking about the superficial fixes, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a health care system in the United States. We have a sickness care system in the United States. We just wait till somebody gets sick, and then we talk about who's going to pay for the treatment and how they're going to be treated. What we need to talk about is why so many Americans have unnecessary chronic illnesses, so many more compared to other countries. And that gets back into not just the big pharma, not just health insurance companies. It has to do with chemical policies. It has to do with environmental policies. It has to do with food policies. It has to do with drug policies.
Thank you, Senator.
It has to do with environmental
Senator
policies.
Bennett, a question for you. You want to keep the system that we have in place with Obamacare and build on it. You mentioned that a moment ago. Is that enough to get us to universal coverage?
I believe that will get us the quickest way there. And I thought the Vice President was very moving about this, and Mayor Pete as well. I had prostate cancer recently, as you may know, and it's why I was a little late getting in the race. The same week, my kid had her appendectomy out. And I feel very strongly that families ought to be able to have this choice. I think that's what the American people want. I believe it will get us there quickly. There are millions of people in America that do not have health insurance today because they can't. They're too wealthy. They make too much money to be on Medicaid. They can't afford health insurance. When Senator Sanders says that Canada is single payer, there are 35 million people in Canada. There are 330 million people in the United States, easily the number of people on a public option. It could easily be 35 million. And for them, it would be Medicare for all, as Mayor Buttigieg says. But for others that want to keep it, they should be able to keep it. And I think that will be the fastest way to get where we need to go. Also, I will say, Bernie is a very honest person. He has said over and over again, unlike others that have supported this legislation, over and over again, that this will make illegal all insurance except cosmetic, except insurance for, I guess that's for plastic surgery. Everything else is banned under the Medicare for All proposal that he has put forward.
I'd let you go a little longer there, but obviously, Senator Sanders, you got a response. Senator Sanders, you
just very briefly. You know, Mike, Medicare is the most popular health insurance program in the country. People don't like their private insurance companies. They like their doctors and hospitals. Under our plan, people go to any doctor they want, any hospital they want. We will substantially lower the cost of health care in this country because we'll stop the greed of the insurance companies.
On this issue, we have to think about how this affects real people. And the reality of how this affects real people is captured in a story that many of us heard, and I will paraphrase. There is, any night in America, a parent who's seeing that their child has a temperature that is out of control, calls 911, what should I do? And they say, take the child to the emergency room. And so they get in their car, and they drive, and they're sitting in the parking lot outside of the emergency room, looking at those sliding glass doors while they have the hand on the forehead of their child, knowing that if they walk through those sliding glass doors, even though they have insurance, They will be out of $5,000 deductible when they walk through those doors. That's what insurance companies are doing in America today.
We're going to continue this discussion. I wanted to put it in candidates, please.
I'm one of those parents. I was just in the emergency room, and I'm telling
Congressman,
you.
thank you.
We fight health insurance companies every single week. We stand in line and pay expensive prescription drugs. We have to have a health care guarantee. If you're sick, you're seen, and in America, you never go broke because of it.
Okay. A lot of you have been talking tonight about these government health care plans that you've proposed in one form or another. This is a show of hands question, and hold them up for a moment so people can see. Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants. Okay. Let me start with you, Mayor Buttigieg. Why? Mayor Buttigieg, why?
Because our country is healthier when everybody is healthier. And remember, we're talking about something people are given a chance to buy into. In the same way that there are undocumented immigrants in my community who they pay sales taxes, they pay property taxes directly or indirectly. This is not about a handout. This is an insurance program. And we do ourselves no favors by having 11 million undocumented people in our country be unable to access health care. But of course, the real problem is we shouldn't have 11 million undocumented people with no pathway to citizenship. It makes no sense. And the American people agree on what to do. This is the crazy thing. If leadership consists of forming a consensus around a divisive issue, this White House has divided us around a consensus issue. The American people want a pathway to citizenship. They want protections for dreamers. We need to clean up the lawful immigration system, like how my father immigrated to this country. And as part of a compromise, we can do whatever common sense measures are needed at the border. But Washington can't deliver on something the American people want. What does that tell you about the system we're living in? It tells you it needs profound structural reform.
Vice President Biden, I believe you said that your health care plan would not cover undocumented immigrants. Could you explain your position?
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon.
I believe at the show of hands you did not raise your hand. Did you raise your hand?
No, I did.
Sorry. So you said they would be covered under your plan, which is different than Obamacare.
Yes, but here's the thing.
Can you explain that change?
Yes. You cannot let, as the mayor said, you cannot let people who are sick, no matter where they come from, no matter what their status, go uncovered. You can't do that. It's just going to be taken care of, period. You have to. It's a humane thing to do. But here's the deal. The deal is that he's right about three things. Number one, they, in fact, contribute to the well-being of the country, but they also, for example, they've increased the lifespan of Social Security because they have a job, they're paying a Social Security tax. That's what they're doing. It's increased the lifespan. They would do the same thing in terms of reducing the overall cost of health care by them being able to be treated and not wait till they're in extremis. The other thing is, folks, look, we can deal with these insurance companies. We can deal with the insurance companies by, number one, putting insurance executives in jail for their misleading advertising, what they're doing on opioids, what they're doing paying doctors to prescribe. We could be doing this by making sure everyone who is on Medicare, that the government should be able to negotiate the price for whatever the drug costs are. We can do this by making sure that we're in a position that we, in fact, allow people. Time's up.
I just want to address that point.
Actually, you can hold off a minute. We need to take a short break here. We got a lot more we need to talk to all of you about, so stick with us. We're just getting started. We'll be back with more from Miami right after this.
Okay, guys. All right, so I've asked my panelists to come up with a few points that stood out for them, and I've got mine real quick. First of all, freaking John Hickenlooper, who we call Governor Frackenlooper, has some nerve talking about fossil fuels when he sued or threatened to sue 4 Colorado towns for banning fracking. That's number one. Mayor Pete talking about working class people not subsidizing rich people as far as Bernie's free college plan. That's not what's happening. It's going to be paid for by a financial transaction tax. Number 3, Andrew Yang's talking about a value-added tax. Everybody knows that's regressive because it hits poor people harder than the rich because they spend more of their income. And finally, as far as the health care debate, Obviously, Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden are completely canceled because they were talking about building on Obamacare and the public option. And Bernie Sanders was fantastic when he said that the function of the health insurance companies is to make money, and that how he's going to make it happen, and I keep returning to this, is that people are going to need to make it happen. He needs us, the political revolution, to make this happen. Ron.
30 seconds.
Joe Biden mentioned putting insurance execs in jail. It'll be really awkward for him trying to put insurance execs in jail right after he has a fundraising dinner at their houses. So
yeah.
I'm sure that was sincere.
Well, they'll be there. I don't know where they're at.
Kamala Harris bringing up a story about a kid having to go to the emergency room. It's ironic she would use that as a story because, you know, if that kid was late for school the next day, she'd want to throw their parents in jail. Oh, and John Hickenlooper clearly doesn't know what socialism is, but at least he took a night off from watching porn with one of his family members.
Sorry. Okay.
All right, well, we got to...
This month, more than 130,000 migrants were apprehended at the southern border. Many of them are being detained, including small children, in private detention centers in Florida and throughout our country. Most of the candidates on this stage say the conditions at these facilities are abhorrent. On January 20th, 2021, if you are president, what specifically would you do with the thousands of people who try to reach the United States every day and want a better life through asylum?
Immediately on January 20th of 2021, I will, first of all, we cannot forget our DACA recipients, and so I'm going to start there. I will immediately, by executive action, reinstate DACA status and DACA protection to those young people. I will further extend protection for deferral of deportation for their parents and for veterans, who we have so many who are undocumented and have served our country and fought for our democracy. I will also immediately put in place a meaningful process for reviewing the cases for asylum. I will release children from cages. I will get rid of the private detention centers. And I will ensure that this microphone that the President of the United States holds in her hand is used in a way that is about reflecting the values of our country and not about locking children up, separating them from their parents. And I have to just say that we have to think about this issue in terms of real people. A mother who pays a coyote to transport her child through their country of origin, through the entire country of Mexico, facing unknown peril to come here. Why would that mother do that? I will tell you. Because she has decided for that child to remain where they are is worse. But what does Donald Trump do? He says, go back to where you came from. That is not reflective of our America and our values, and it's got to end.
Governor Hickenlooper, day one, if you are, day one at the White House, how do you respond?
Deal with these children?
Let me get to you in just a second.
I'm sorry.
Governor, day one, thousands of men, women, and children cross the border asking for asylum for a better life. What do you do? Day one, hour one.
Well, certainly the images we've seen this week just compound the emotional impact that the world is judging us by. If you'd ever told me any time in my life that this country would sanction federal agents to take children from the arms of their parents, put them in cages, actually put them up for adoption, in Colorado we call that kidnapping, I would have told you it was unbelievable. And the first thing we have to do is recognize the humanitarian crisis on the border for what it is. We make sure that there are the sufficient facilities in place so that women and children are not separated from their families, the children are with their families. We have to make sure that that ICE is completely reformed, and they begin looking at their job in a humanitarian way where they're addressing the whole needs of the people that they are engaged with along the border. And we'd have to make sure ultimately that we provide not just shelter, but food, clothing, and access to medical care.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes, what Donald Trump has done to these children, and it's not just in Colorado, Governor, you're right, it is kidnapping, and it's extremely important for us to realize that. If you forcibly take a child from their parents' arms, you're kidnapping them. And if you take a lot of children and you put them in a detainment center, thus inflicting chronic trauma upon them, that's called child abuse. This is collective child abuse. And when this is crime, both of those things are a crime. And if your government does it, that doesn't make it less of a crime. These are state-sponsored crimes.
Congressman.
And what President Trump has done is not only attack these children, not only demonize these immigrants, he is attacking a basic principle of America's moral core. We open our hearts to the stranger. This is extremely important. And it's also important for all of us to remember, and I have great respect for everyone who is on this stage, but we're going to talk about what to do about health care. Well, where have you been, guys? Because if it's not just a matter of a plan, and I haven't heard anybody on this stage who has talked about American foreign policy in Latin America and how we might have, in the last few decades, contributed to something being more.
Senator Gillibrand, what would you do as president with a reality?
Well, one of the worst things about President Trump that he's done to this country is he's torn apart the moral fabric of who we are. When he started separating children at the border from their parents, the fact that 7 children have died in his custody, the fact that dozens of children have been separated from their parents and they have no plan to reunite them. So I would do a few things. First, I would fight for comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. Second, I would reform how we treat asylum seekers at the border. I would have a community-based treatment center where you're doing it within the communities, where asylum seekers are given lawyers, where there's real immigration judges, not employees of the Attorney General, but appointed for life, and have a community-based system. I would fund border security, but the worst thing President Trump has done is he's diverted the funds away from cross-border terrorism, cross-border human trafficking, drug trafficking, and gun trafficking, and he's given that money to the for-profit prisons. I would not be spending money in for-profit prisons to lock up children and asylum seekers.
We had a very spirited debate on this stage last night on the topic of decriminalization of the border. If you'd be so kind, raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross the border without documentation. Can we keep the hands up so we could see them?
And let's remember, that's not just a theoretical exercise. That criminalization, that is the basis for family separation. You do away with that, it's no longer possible. Of course, it wouldn't be possible anyway in my presidency because it is dead wrong. We got to talk about one other thing, because the Republican Party likes to cloak itself in the language of religion. Now, our party doesn't talk about that as much, largely for a very good reason, which was we are committed to the separation of church and state, and we stand for people of any religion and people of no religion. But we should call out hypocrisy when we see it. And for a party that associates itself with Christianity, to say that it is okay to suggest that God would smile on the division of families at the hands of federal agents, that God would condone putting children in cages, has lost all claim to ever use religious language again.
Vice President, Mr. Vice President, I don't know if you raised your hand or were just asking to speak. Look, would you decriminalize crossing the border without documents?
The first thing I would do is unite families. I'd surge immediately billions of dollars worth of help to the region immediately. Look, I talk about foreign policy. I'm the guy that got a bipartisan agreement at the very end of the campaign, at the very end of our term, to spend $740 million to deal with the problem. And that was to go to the root cause of why people are leaving in the first place. It was working. We saw, as you know, a net decrease in the number of children who were coming. The crisis was abated. And along came this president. He said he immediately discontinued that. We all talk about these things. I did it. I did it. $740 million. Now look, second thing we have to do. The law now requires the reuniting of those families. We would reunite those families, period. And if not, we'd put those children in a circumstance where they were safe until we could find their parents. And lastly, the idea that he's in court with his Justice Department saying children in cages do not need a bed, do not need a blanket, do not need a toothbrush. That is outrageous.
Vice President, the Obama-Biden administration Obama-Biden administration deported more than 3 million Americans. My question to you is, if an individual is living in the United States of America without documents and that is his only offense, should that person be deported?
No. Depending if they committed a major crime. They should be deported. And the president was left in his, President Obama, I think, did a heck of a job. To compare him to what this guy's doing is absolutely, I find, close to immoral. But the fact is that, look, we should not be locking people up. We should be making sure we change the circumstance, as we did, why they would leave in the first place. And those who come seeking asylum, we should immediately have the capacity to absorb them, keep them safe until they can be heard.
A 15-second, if you could, if you wish to answer. Should someone who is here without documents, and that is his only offense, should that person be deported?
That person should not be the focus of deportation. We should fundamentally change the way we deal with things.
Senator,
I want to suggest that I agree with a lot of what Kamala just said. And that is, on day one, we take out our executive order pen and we rescind every damn thing on this issue that Trump has done. Number two, picking up on the point that Joe made, we got to look at the root causes. And you have a situation where Honduras, among other things, is a failing state, massive corruption. You got gangs who are telling families that if a 10-year-old does not join that gang, that family is going to be killed. What we have got to do on day one is invite the presidents and the leadership of Central America and Mexico together. This is a hemispheric problem that we have got to address.
Congressman Swalwell, what do you do?
Day one?
No. If someone is here without documents and that is their only offense, is that person to be deported?
No. That person can be a part of this great American experience. That person can contribute. My congressional district is one of the most diverse in America, and we see the benefits when people contribute and they become a part of the community and they're not in the shadow economy. Day one for me, families are reunited. This president, though, for immigrants, there's nothing he will not do to separate a family, cage a child, or erase their existence by weaponizing the census. And there is nothing that we cannot do in the courts and that I will not do as president to reverse that and to make sure that families always belong together.
Senator Harris.
Well, thank you. I will say, no, absolutely not. They should not be deported. And I actually, this was one of the very few issues with which I disagreed with the administration, with whom I otherwise had a great relationship and a great deal of respect. But on the secure communities issue, I was Attorney General of California. I led the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice in a state of 40 million people. And on this issue, I disagreed with my president because the policy was to allow deportation of people who, by ICE's own definition, were non-criminals. So as Attorney General and the Chief Law Officer of the state of California, I issued a directive to the sheriffs of my state that they did not have to comply with detainers and instead should make decisions based on the best interest of public safety of their community. Because what I saw, and I was tracking it every day, I was tracking it and saw that parents, people who had not committed a crime, even by ICE's own definition, were being deported. But I have to add a point here. The problem with this kind of policy, and I know it as a prosecutor, Senator, I want a rape victim to be able to run in the middle of the street and wave down a police officer and report the crime against her. I want anybody who has been the victim of any real crime to be able to do that and not be afraid that if they do that, they will be deported because the abuser will tell them it is they who is the criminal. It is wrong. It is wrong.
We're going to turn to the issue of trade now, if we can. Last night, we asked the candidates on this stage to name the greatest geopolitical threat facing the U.S. 4 of them mentioned China. U.S. businesses say China steals our intellectual property, and party leaders on both sides accuse China of manipulating their currency to keep the cost of goods artificially low. I'll ask this to Senator Bennett to start off with. How would you stand up to China?
I think that, first of all, the biggest threat to our national security right now is Russia, not China. And second, on China, we've got competition because of what they've done with our election. In China, I think the president's been right to push back on China, but has done it in completely the wrong way. We should mobilize the entire rest of the world, who all have a shared interest in pushing back on China's mercantilist trade policies, and I think we can do that. I'd like to answer the other question before this as well.
You have the time?
When I see these kids at the border, I see my mom because I know she sees herself, because she was separated from her parents for years during the Holocaust in Poland. And for Donald Trump to be doing what he's doing to children and their families at the borders, I say this as somebody who wrote the immigration bill in 2013 that created a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people in this country, that had the most progressive DREAM Act that's ever been conceived, much less passed. It got 68 votes in the Senate, that had $46 billion of border security in it, that was sophisticated 21st century border security, not a medieval wall. And the president has turned the border of the United States into a symbol of nativist hostility that the whole world is looking at, when what we should be represented by is the Statue of Liberty, which has brought my parents to this country to begin with. We need to make a change.
Mr. Yang, let me bring you in on this, on the issue of China. You've expressed a lot of concerns about technology and taking jobs. Are you worried about China? And if so, how would you stand up against it?
Well, I just want to agree that I think Russia is our greatest geopolitical threat, because they've been hacking our democracy successfully, and they've been laughing their asses off about it for the last couple of years. So we should focus on that before we start worrying about other threats. Now, China, they do pirate our intellectual property. It's a massive problem. But the tariffs and the trade war are just punishing businesses and producers and workers on both sides. I met with a farmer in Iowa who said he spent 6 years building up a buying relationship in China that's now disappeared and gone forever. And the beneficiaries have not been American workers or people in China. It's been Southeast Asia and other producers that have then stepped into the void. So we need to crack down on Chinese malfeasance in the trade relationship, but the tariffs and the trade war are the wrong way to go.
All right, Mayor Buttigieg, how would you stand up against China?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we've got to recognize that the China challenge really is a serious one. This is not something to dismiss or wave away. And if you look at what China is doing, they're using technology for the perfection of dictatorship. But their fundamental economic model isn't going to change because of some tariffs. I live in the industrial Midwest. Folks who aren't in the shadow of a factory are somewhere near a soy field where I live. And manufacturers, and especially soy farmers, are hurting. Tariffs are taxes. And Americans are going to pay on average $800 more a year because of these tariffs. Meanwhile, China is investing so that they could soon be able to run circles around us in artificial intelligence. And this president is fixated on the China relationship as if all that mattered was the export balance on dishwashers. We've got a much bigger issue on our hands, but at a moment when their authoritarian model is being held up as an alternative to ours because ours looks so chaotic compared to theirs right now because of our internal divisions. The biggest thing we've got to do is invest in our own domestic competitiveness. If we disinvest in our own infrastructure, education, we are never going to be able to compete. And if we really want to be an alternative, a democratic alternative, we actually have to demonstrate that we care about democratic values at home and around the world.
We've got a good debate so far. We're going to take a quick break here, candidates. When we come back, the questioning continues with our colleagues, Chuck Todd, Rachel Maddow will be here. Much more with our candidates straight ahead.
Wait, so let me start because I didn't get to talk last time.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to throw it to you.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go.
Oh, okay.
You want me to go?
So, no, I just want to mention that a buy-in isn't Medicare for all. When they continuously talk about having buy-ins that are not directly talking about plastic surgery or cosmetic surgery, that is not Medicare for all. So all these people are out there telling you they support Medicare for all. You have to look at their individual plans and the individual plans that they are co-sponsoring, but not only the plans that they are co-sponsoring, but also the plans that they are making on their own. Also, Marianne Williamson is the only one that has literally tied the issue of immigration to our interventionist wars. Tomorrow is the anniversary in Honduras where Secretary of State Clinton, back during the Obama administration, forced a coup in Honduras, and this is the situation we are facing now because of that. She's the only one to bring light on that. Bernie Sanders had an opportunity. He didn't do it. Tulsi Gabbard didn't do it yesterday. So honestly, the ball's on them to do that. So one more thing. You guys know Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is a really great public speaker. She was a prosecutor for years. She's talking about separating families at the border. She was the #1 pusher for truancy laws that literally separated children from their families. So I'm going to call her out on that. I do not believe a word she's saying.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. She also said that she'd abolish kids in cages on day one, but yet she goes and stands behind sanctions. She stands behind regime change in Venezuela, which is the ultimate, issue of why we have so much migration. As Fiorella said, tomorrow is the 10-year anniversary of the coup in 2009 in Honduras, and Fiorella has gone down to the border several times. By her numbers, almost 80% of them, 80% of them are coming from the North Triangle, Honduras. This has to do with our intervention, and we turned the place upside down, and we also, once again, not allowing the American people to see a socialistic leader. They put Lula in jail in Brazil, and they threw Manuel Zelaya out of Honduras, and that's what they're doing all around the world. It's a big issue, so Kamala, no good. Also, really quick, China didn't screw us over. Our politicians did. They signed NAFTA. Our oligarchs, the people who benefit off the moves to China, they're the ones who screwed us. China's creating a middle class right now that is beyond belief. China is not our enemy. Our policies when it comes to trade and how we deal with China, that is the enemy. So don't be duped when they tell you that China is our enemy. They're growing a middle class beyond. They've taken, and I'll hand it over to you, Lauren, 600 million people and moved them out of poverty. Sorry for banging on the desk. Thank you.
Well, the problem is that China, they said that we were going to do the TPP as a pivot to Asia. That was Obama's pivot to Asia. But what people didn't realize was that TPP was a docking agreement, which is China could sign on any time. So it wasn't a pivot to Asia, but what it was a cover-up of militarization, because the military-industrial complex makes money by having wars against, or military buildups against big countries like Russia and China, not by little terrorists who have, guerrilla warfare in the cities and in the rural areas. They need to have big weapon systems. And you know that since they've now made Russia and China the new boogeymen, those defense industry stocks are through the roofs. So the question is, why are we always talking about competition? We need to be cooperating with these countries. We don't need to have adversaries. We need to have partners in fighting the two biggest existential threats, which are climate change and nuclear annihilation.
Absolutely, yes. Hold on.
And when Ro Khanna starts talking about competition with China, and he's as progressive as they get in the Congress, I have to tweet back at him, why is it always about competition? China is doing the New Belt and Road Initiative. We should be joining that New Belt and Road Initiative, not trying to fight it.
Yeah. Also, when's the last time you've seen China in a war?
Exactly.
Back to the debate.
When we start, Ron goes next.
Ron, you'll start next break.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Democratic presidential debate from the Arch Center in Miami.
As we continue the questioning, we want to bring in more members of our team.
So let's turn it over to Chuck Todd and Rachel Maddow.
Well, Rachel, I had a dream that we've done this before.
No. This is definitely
didn't happen.
the first time.
Definitely first time. Thank you, Lester, Savannah, and Jose. Let's quickly recap the rules one more time. 20 candidates qualified for this first debate. We've heard from 10 of them from last night. We're hearing from 10 more tonight. Breakdown for each night was selected at random. Candidates will have 60 seconds to answer direct questions, 30 seconds for follow-ups if necessary.
Because of this large field of candidates, not every person will be able to comment on everything, but the less audience reaction there is, the more time they will all get. Over the course of the next hour, we will hear from all of these candidates, but we are going to begin this hour with Mayor Buttigieg. In the last 5 years, civil rights activists in our country have led a national debate over race and the criminal justice system. Your community of South Bend, Indiana, has recently been in uproar over an officer-involved shooting. The police force in South Bend is now 6% black in a city that is 26% black. Why has that not improved over your 2 terms as mayor?
Because I couldn't get it done. My community is in anguish right now. because of an officer-involved shooting. A black man, Eric Logan, killed by a white officer. And I'm not allowed to take sides until the investigation comes back. The officer said he was attacked with a knife, but he didn't have his body camera on. It's a mess, and we're hurting. And I could walk you through all of the things that we have done as a community, all of the steps that we took from bias training to de-escalation, but it didn't save the life of Eric Logan. And when I look into his mother's eyes, I have to face the fact that nothing that I say will bring him back. This is an issue that is facing our community and so many communities around the country. And until we move policing out from the shadow of systemic racism, whatever this particular incident teaches us, we will be left with the bigger problem of the fact that there's a wall of mistrust put up one racist act at a time, not just from what's happened in the past, but from what's happening around the country in the present. It threatens the well-being of every community. And I am determined to bring about a day when a white person driving a vehicle and a black person driving a vehicle, when they see a police officer approaching, feels the exact same thing, a feeling not of fear, but of safety. I am determined to bring that day about.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I could ask one question, just because I think...
Governor, I'll give you 30 seconds.
I think that the question they're asking in South Bend, I think in cities across the country, is why has it taken so long? We had a shooting when I first became mayor 10 years before Ferguson, and the community came together and we created an Office of the Independent Monitor, a Civilian Oversight Commission. We diversified the police force in 2 years. We actually did de-escalation training. I think the real question that America should be asking is why 5 years after Ferguson, every city doesn't have this level of police accountability.
Governor Hickenlooper, thank you.
I've got to respond to that. Look, we've taken so many steps toward police accountability that the FOP just denounced me for too much accountability. We're obviously not there yet. And I accept responsibility for that because I'm in charge.
Policy, you should fire the chief.
So under Indiana law, this will be investigated, and there will be accountability for the officer involved.
But you're the mayor. You should fire the chief if that's the policy and someone died.
All of these issues are extremely important, but there are specifics, there are symptoms, and the underlying cause has to do with deep, deep, deep realms of racial injustice, both in our criminal justice system and in our economic system. And the Democratic Party should be on the side of reparations for slavery for this very reason. I do not believe that the average American is a racist, but the average American is woefully undereducated about the history of race in the United States.
Ms. Williamson, thank you very much.
Vice President Biden, we're going to get to you. Hang on, we're going to get to
stage. I would like to speak on the issue of race.
Senator Harris,
What I will say is
if I could preface this, we will give you 30 seconds since we're going to come back to you on this again in just a moment. Go for 30 seconds.
Okay. So on the issue of race, I couldn't agree more that this is an issue that is still not being talked about truthfully and honestly. There is not a black man I know, be he a relative, a friend, or a coworker, who has not been the subject of some form of profiling or discrimination. Growing up, my sister and I had to deal with the neighbor who told us her parents couldn't play with us because we were black. And I will say also that in this campaign, we have also heard, and I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden, I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me. So I will tell you that on this subject, it cannot be an intellectual debate among Democrats. We have to take it seriously. We have to act swiftly. As Attorney General of California, I was very proud to put in place a requirement that all my special agents would wear body cameras and keep those cameras on.
Senator Harris, thank you. Vice President Biden, you have been invoked. We are going to give you a chance to respond. Vice President Biden.
mischaracterization of my position across the board. I did not praise racist. That is not true. Number one. Number two, if we want to have this campaign litigated on who supports civil rights and whether I did or not, I'm happy to do that. I was a public defender. I didn't become a prosecutor. I came out and I left a good law firm to become a public defender when in fact my city was in flames because of the assassination of Dr. King. Number one. Number two, as the Vice President of the United States, I work with a man who, in fact, we worked very hard to see to it we dealt with these issues in a major, major way. The fact is that in terms of busing, the busing, you would have been able to go to school the same exact way because it was a local decision made by your city council. That's fine. That's one of the things I argued for, that we should be breaking down these lines. But so the bottom line here is, look, everything I've done in my career, I ran because of civil rights. I continue to think we have to make fundamental changes in civil rights. And those civil rights, by the way, include not just only African Americans, but the LGBT community.
But Vice President Biden, do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No.
Do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well, there was a failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision.
So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's why we need to pass the Equality Act. That's why we need to pass the ERA, because there are moments in history where states fail to preserve the civil rights of all people.
I have supported the ERA from the very beginning when I ran for the
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds, because I want to bring other people into this.
I supported the ERA from the very beginning. I'm the guy that extended the Voting Rights Act for 25 years. We got to the place where we got 98 out of 98 votes in the United States Senate doing it. I've also argued very strongly that we, in fact, deal with the notion of denying people access to the ballot box. I agree that everybody, once they, in fact, they should. Anyway, my time's up. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Vice President.
All of these things have
Senator Sanders, Senator Sanders, I want to go to you on this. You said on the day you launched your campaign that voters should focus on what people stand for, not a candidate's race or age or sexual orientation. Many Democrats are very excited by the diversity of this field on this stage and on last night's stage, and the perspective that diversity brings to this contest and to these issues. Are you telling Democratic voters that diversity shouldn't matter when they make this decision?
No, absolutely not. Unlike the Republican Party, we encourage diversity. We believe in diversity. That's what America is about. But in addition to diversity, in terms of having more women, more people from the LGBT community, we also have to do something else. And that is, we have to ask ourselves a simple question. And that, how come today the worker in the middle of our economy is making no more money than he or she made 45 years ago, and that in the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth? We need a party that is diverse, but we need a party that has the guts to stand up to the powerful special interests who have so much power over the economic and political life of this country.
Senator Gillibrand, I want to give you 30 seconds on this.
Well, first of all, where Bernie left off, we've heard a lot of good ideas on this stage tonight and a lot of plans. But the truth is, until you go to the root of the corruption, the money in politics, the fact that Washington is run by the special interests, you are never going to solve any of these problems. I have the most comprehensive approach that experts agree is the most transformative plan to actually take on political corruption, to get money out of politics through publicly funded elections, to have clean elections. If we do that and get money out of politics, we can guarantee health care as a right, not a privilege. We can deal with institutional racism. We can take on income inequality. And we can take on the corporate corruption that runs Washington.
And the first constitutional amendment to do that was introduced by me when I was a young senator.
Thank you, Vice President. We want to shift topics here. Senator Bennett, the next question is for you. On the issue of partisan gridlock, President Obama promised in 2012 that after his reelection, Republicans would want to work with Democrats. Fever would break. That did not happen. Now, Vice President Biden is saying the same thing, that if he is elected in 2020, both parties will want to work together. Should voters believe that somehow if there's a Democratic president in 2021, that gridlock is going to magically disappear?
Gridlock will not magically disappear as long as Mitch McConnell is there, first. Second, that's why it is so important for us to win not just the presidency, to have somebody that can run in all 50 states, but to win the Senate as well. And that's why we have to propose policies that can be supported, like Medicare X, so that we can build a broad coalition of Americans to overcome broken Washington, D.C. I agree with what Senator Gillibrand was saying. I share a lot of her views. We need to end gerrymandering in Washington. We need to end political gerrymandering in Washington. The court today said they couldn't do anything about it. We need to overturn Citizens United. The court was the one that gave us Citizens United, and the attack on voting rights in Shelby versus Holder is something we need to deal with. All of those things has happened since Vice President Biden was in the Senate. And we face structural problems that we have to overcome with a broad coalition. It's the only way we can do it. We need to root out the corruption in Washington, expand people's right to get to the polls, and I think then we can succeed.
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds. It does sound as if you haven't seen what's been happening in the United States Senate over the last 12 years. It didn't happen. Why?
I have seen what happened just since we were vice president. We needed 3 votes to pass an $800 billion recovery act that kept us from going into depression. I got 3 votes changed. We needed to be able to keep the government from shutting down and going bankrupt. I got Mitch McConnell to raise taxes $600 billion by raising the top rate. And as recently as after President got elected, I was able to put together a coalition of the Cures Act that billions of dollars go into cancer research, bipartisan. But sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you just have to go out and beat them. I went into 20 states, over 60 candidates, and guess what? We beat them. We won back the Senate.
Thank you.
Chuck,
thank you,
the problem with what the Vice President...
Yeah, 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Sometimes you do have to beat him, but the deal that he talked about with Mitch McConnell was a complete victory for the Tea Party. It extended the Bush tax cuts permanently. The Democratic Party had been running against that for 10 years. We lost that economic argument because that deal extended almost all those Bush tax cuts permanently and put in place the mindless cuts that we still are dealing with today that are called the sequester. That was a great deal for Mitch McConnell. It was a terrible deal for America.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Bennett. Go ahead, 30 seconds.
The reason why the Trump tax cut had to be passed is because they had to pay back their donors. You heard it. They actually said those words. So the corruption in Washington is real, and it is something that makes every one of the plans we've heard about over the last several months impossible. And I have the most comprehensive approach to do it with clean elections, publicly funded elections. So we restore the power of our democracy into the hands of the voters, not into the Koch brothers. We were talking about issues. Imagine, we're in Florida, imagine the Parkland kids having as much power in our democracy as the Koch brothers or the NRA. Imagine their voices carrying farther and wider than anyone else because their voice is needed.
Senator Gillibrand, I'm trying to get everybody in here.
It's the first thing I'm going to do because nothing else is possible, whether it's education or health care or ending institutional racism.
Thank you very much.
Senator Sanders, I'd like to put a different question to you. Roe versus Wade has been the law of the land since 1973. Now that there is a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, several Republican-controlled states have passed laws to severely restrict or even ban abortion. One of those laws could very well make it to the Supreme Court during your presidency, if you're elected president. What is your plan if Roe is struck down in the court while you're president?
Well, my plan is somebody who believes, for a start, that a woman's right to control her own body is a constitutional right, that government and politicians should not infringe on that right. We will do everything we can to defend our Roe versus Wade. Second of all, let me make a promise here. You ask about litmus test. My litmus test is I will never nominate any justice to the Supreme Court unless that justice is 100% clear he or she will defend Roe v. Wade. Third of all, I do not believe in packing the court. We got a terrible 5-4 majority conservative court right now. But I do believe that constitutionally we have the power to rotate judges to other courts. And that brings in new blood into the Supreme Court, and a majority, I hope, that will understand that a woman has the right to control her own body and that corporations cannot run the United States of America.
Hold on, I'm going to give you 10 additional seconds, because the question is, what if the court has already overturned Roe, and Roe is gone? All of the things you just described would be to try to preserve Roe. If Roe is gone, what could you do as president to preserve abortion rights?
Well, first of all, let me tell you this. It didn't come up here, but let's face this. Medicare for all guarantees every woman in this country the right to have an abortion if she wants it.
Thank you, Senator.
And can I just address this for a second? And I want to talk directly to America's women and to the men who love them. Women's reproductive rights are under assault by President Trump and the Republican Party. 30 states are trying to overturn Roe v. Wade right now. And it is mind-boggling to me that we are debating this on this stage in 2019 among Democrats, whether women should have access to reproductive rights. I think we have to stop playing defense and start playing offense. But let me tell you one thing about politics, because it goes to the corruption and the deal-making. When the door is closed and the negotiations are made, there are conversations about women's rights, and compromises have been made on our backs. That's how we got to Hyde. That's how the Hyde Amendment was created, a compromise by leaders of both parties. Then we have the ACA. During the ACA negotiation, I had to fight like heck with other women to make sure that contraception wasn't sold down the river or abortion services. And so what we need to know is, imagine this one question. When we beat President Trump, and Mitch McConnell walks into the Oval Office, God forbid, to do negotiations, who do you want, when that door closes, to be sitting behind that desk to fight for women's rights? I have been the fiercest advocate for women's reproductive freedom for over a decade. And I promise you, as president, when that door closes, I will guarantee women's reproductive freedom no matter what.
Thank you. We're moving to climate. We're moving to climate, guys. Senator Harris, I'm addressing you first on this. You live in a state that has been hit by drought, wildfires, flooding. Climate change is a major concern for voters in your state. It's pretty obvious. Obviously, this state as well. Yeah. Last night, voters heard many of the candidates weigh in on their proposals. Explain specifically what yours is.
Well, first of all, I don't even call it climate change. It's a climate crisis. It represents an existential threat to us as a species. And the fact that we have a president of the United States who has embraced science fiction over science fact will be to our collective peril. I visited, while the embers were smoldering, the wildfires in California. I spoke with firefighters who were in the midst of fighting a fire while their own homes were burning. And on this issue, it is a critical issue that is about what we must do to confront what is immediate and before us right now. That is why I support a Green New Deal. It is why I believe on day one, and as president, will re-enter us in the Paris Agreement, because we have to take these issues seriously. And frankly, we have a president of the United States. We talked about, you asked before, what is the greatest national security threat to the United States? It's Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I agree, climate change represents an existential threat. He denies the science. You want to talk about North Korea, real threat in terms of nuclear arsenal, but what does he do? He embraces Kim Jong-un, a dictator for the sake of a photo op. Putin, you want to talk about Russia?
Harris, we're going to
he takes the word of the Russian president over the word of the American intelligence community when it comes to a threat to our democracy and our elections.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
These are the issues that are before us, Chuck.
I hear you. Thank you, Senator Harris. Mayor Buttigieg, in your climate plan, if you're elected president in your first term, how is this going to help farmers impacted by climate change in the Midwest?
Well, the reality is we need to begin adapting right away, but we also can't skip a beat on preventing climate change from getting even worse. It's why we need aggressive and ambitious measures. It's why we need to do a carbon tax and dividend. But I would propose we do it in a way that is rebated out to the American people in a progressive fashion so that most Americans are made more than whole. This isn't theoretical for us in South Bend either. Parts of California on fire, right here in Florida, they're talking about sea level rise. Well, in Indiana, I had to activate the Emergency Operations Center of our city twice in less than 2 years. The first time was a 1,000-year flood, and the next time was a 500-year flood. This is not just happening on the Arctic ice caps. This is happening in the middle of the country, and we've got to be dramatically more aggressive moving forward. Now, here's what very few people talk about. First of all, rural America can be part of the solution instead of being told they're part of the problem. With the right kind of soil management and other kind of investments, rural America could be a huge part of how we get this done. And secondly, we've got to look to the leadership of local communities. You know, those networks of mayors and cities from around the world who have come together, not even waiting for our national governments to catch up. We should have a Pittsburgh summit where we bring them together as well as rejoining the Paris.
Thank you, Mayor Buttigieg.
I want to bring Governor Hickenlooper into this for a moment. Governor, you have said that oil and gas companies should be a part of the solution on climate change. Lots of your colleagues on stage tonight have talked about moving away from fossil fuels entirely. Can oil and gas companies be real partners in this fight?
Well, I share the sense of urgency. I'm a scientist, so I recognize that we're within 10 or 12 years of actually, suffering irreversible damage. But guaranteeing everybody a government job is not going to get us there. Socialism, and in that sense, is not the solution. We have to look at what really will make a difference. In Colorado, we're closing a couple of coal plants, replacing them with wind, solar, and batteries, and the monthly bills go down. We're building a network for electric vehicles. We are working with the oil and gas industry, and we created the first methane regulations in the country. Methane is 25 times worse than CO2. And then we've got to get to that last part. I mean, the industrial, heavy industry, we haven't seen the plans yet. If you look at the real problem, CO2, the worst polluters in CO2 is China, is the United States, and then it's concrete and it's exhalation. And beyond that, I think we've got to recognize that only by bringing people together, businesses, nonprofits, and we can't demonize every business. We've got to bring them together to be part of this thing, because ultimately, if we're not able to do that, we will be doomed to failure. We have no way of doing this without bringing everyone together.
Thank you. Vice President Biden, on the issue of how you do this, Democrats are arguing robustly among themselves about what's the best way to tackle climate change. But if we're honest, many Republicans, including the president, are still not sure if they believe it is even a serious problem. So, are there significant ways you can cut carbon emissions if you have to do it with no support from Congress?
The answer is yes. Number one, in our administration, we built the largest wind farm in the world, the largest solar energy facility in the world. We drove down the price, competitive price of both of those renewable sources. I would immediately insist that we, in fact, build 500,000 recharging stations throughout the United States of America, working with governors, mayors, and others, so that we can go to a full electric vehicle future by the year 2020, or by the year 2030. I would make sure that we invested $400 million in new science and technology to be the exporter not only of the green economy, but economy that can create millions of jobs. But I would immediately join the Paris climate accord. I would up the ante in that accord, which it calls for, because we make up 15% of the problem. 85% of the world makes up the rest. And so we have to have someone who knows how to corral the rest of the world, bring them together, and get something done like we did in our administration.
Senator Sanders, I want to give you 30 seconds to follow up, and I'm going to hold you to 30.
Look, the old ways are no longer relevant. The scientists tell us we have 12 years before there is irreparable damage to this planet. This is a global issue. What the President of the United States should do is not deny the reality of climate change, but tell the rest of the world that instead of spending $1.5 trillion on weapons of destruction, let us get together for the common enemy, and that is to transform the world's energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. The future of the planet rests on us doing that.
Before we go, hang on.
Before we leave this topic.
Here's the solution. Pass the torch. Pass the torch to the generation that's going to feel the effects of climate change. Pass the torch to the generation that's inventive enough.
Thank you both.
Before we leave this topic, here's something you will all want to weigh in on. Hold on a moment. Hold one moment.
Just trust us on this.
Somebody has a younger body doesn't mean you don't have old ideas.
No, we didn't do
ideas. John Kennedy did not say, I have a plan to get a man to the moon, and so we're going to do it, and I think we can all work together, and maybe we can get a man on the moon. John Kennedy said, by the end of this decade, we are going to put a man on the moon. Because John Kennedy was back in the day when politics included the people, and included imagination, and included great dreams, and included great plans. And I have had a career not making the political plans, but I have had a career harnessing the inspiration and the motivation and the excitement of people, masses of people, when we know that when we say we are going to turn from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we're going to have a Green New Deal, we're going to create millions of jobs, we're going to do this within the next 12 years, because I'm not interested in just winning the next election. We are interested in our grandchildren.
All right, we're going to sneak in a break in a minute, but before we go, I'm going to go down the line here, and I'm asking you, please, for 1 or 2 words only. All right? Please.
Really?
President Obama in his first year wanted to address both health care and climate. And he could only get one signature issue accomplished. It was, obviously, health care. He didn't get to do climate change. You may only get one shot, and your first issue that you're going to push, you get one shot that it may be the only thing you get passed. What is that first issue for your presidency? Eric Swalwell, you're first.
For Parkland, for Orlando, for every community affected by gun violence, ending gun violence.
Senator Bennett.
Climate change and the lack of economic mobility Bernie talks about.
Senator Gillibrand.
Passing a family bill of rights that includes a national paid leave plan, universal pre-K, affordable daycare, and making sure that women and families can thrive in the workplace no matter who they are.
Oh, I like that.
That was pretty good. Senator Harris.
Then. So passing a middle class and working families tax cut,
That's one.
DACA, guns.
Okay. I'm giving you credit for the first thing you said, the tax cut. I got you. Senator Sanders, first thing.
The premise that there's only 1 or 2 issues out there. This
I'm not saying there isn't 1 or 2.
Enormous crises.
Senator Sanders.
We need a political revolution. People have got to stand up and take on the special interest. We can transform this country.
Fine. Vice President Biden, your first issue, Mr. Vice President.
I think you're so underestimating what Barack Obama did. He's the first man to bring together the entire world, 196 nations, to commit to deal with climate change immediately. So I don't buy that. But the first thing I would do is make sure that we defeat Donald Trump.
Okay.
Period.
Mayor Buttigieg, your first priority, your first issue as president that you were going to block and tackle.
We've got to fix our democracy before it's too late. Get that right. Climate, immigration, taxes, and every other issue gets better.
Mr. Yang.
I would pass a $1,000 freedom dividend for every American adult starting at age 18, which would speed us up on climate change, because if you get the boot off of people's throats, they'll focus on climate change much more clearly.
Governor Hickenlooper?
I would do a collaborative approach to climate change, and I would pronounce it well before the election to make sure we don't re-elect the worst president in American history.
And Ms. Williamson with the last word.
My first call is to Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that her goal is to make New Zealand the place where it's the best place in the world for a child to grow up. And I will tell her girlfriend, you are so on, because the United States of America is going to be the best place in the world for a child to grow up.
You know, thank you. You guys were close with the short, at least it was shorter responses.
Not at all.
All right. C minus.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with these candidates right after this.
Two things, and then I'm going to run. First of all, Obama didn't get to do anything on climate change, says Chuck Todd. Yes, he did. He quadrupled fracking. Thank you very much. And Kamala Harris talking about body cams. We got an article here from the Sacramento Bee which showed that she actually opposed a plan to have body cams statewide.
Yes, she did.
So I call out the mainstream media here for their bullshit questions and also their gotcha questions about Bernie. Again, are you telling voters that diversity shouldn't matter? Again, when was the last time you beat your wife? Ron.
Sounded like you were asking me that question. I was about to be like, I'm
what
not
time
even
is
married.
It?
Like, what are you talking about? So I'll start with the South Bend issue. When they were talking about the South Bend issue, I actually went to Indiana University, and I can tell you something. Basketball is very popular in the state of Indiana. So what I'm saying is I'm sure that's not the first time Pete Buttigieg has been dunked on. But my time is up is the most honest thing Joe Biden has ever said. That is just the most honest thing. They wouldn't have to be such sticklers for the time limitations if Chuck Todd actually understood the questions he's reading.
Yeah.
If he had any understanding of them. Oh, and this is just a kind of fun observation that I had. Mike Bennett sounds like a dude who would trap you in a 2-hour conversation about how great he thinks the American Pie movies are.
I thought he was the running back for Wisconsin. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that I feel like the rising star of this debate has been Marianne Williamson. She's been kind of like putting herself out there, and I didn't expect that from her. I think it's coming from the inspirational speaker part, and I mean, she's been butting in and not caring and just kind of saying what's on her mind, and she's right about healthcare. We need to look at the chemicals around in our lives and all the things that are happening with us. And she's also talking about immigration and talking about war and talking about things that are a little bit outside of these politicians. It's kind of interesting having her in a bed with politicians, because usually politicians see things very much one way. But I think Bernie Sanders totally killed it at this very last part where he said, we need a political revolution. We need people to stand up. That was old Bernie. That was Bernie telling you guys, like, there's way too many issues for me to point out to one. We really need to rise up, and it's all about us. He's always bringing it back to, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, whatever you are. We are all being divided, and we need to come together and actually attack those in power who are the 1%. It's the oligarchy. This battle right here is not about the Republicans and the Democrats. This is about a capitalist oligarchy against a working people's movement, and he literally pointed it out.
All right, but let me just tell you, I'm just going to say one thing.
I got 50 seconds, so I just want to go.
50?
Well, until we go back.
All
Can
right.
I go back and you get
I
it? We'll get it in the next commercial
that.
break?
Okay.
Well, I mean, listen, I just want to kind of echo what Fiorella said about Marianne Williamson. I said this before, Secretary of Education? No?
Secretary of Peace.
Secretary of Peace, whatever.
Maybe
Secretary.
Peace, yeah.
Betsy DeVos out, Marianne Williamson in. I think that would be a great job for her.
Put a non-educated
And then, well, I mean,
she's
an educator.
Ravitch is for Secretary of Education.
Okay, well, fine. She was.
Yeah.
That's a good one too, as well.
Right?
Okay. But what about Andrew Yang? If anybody's flip-flopped and fell down today, it's been the Yang gang. I don't care. When he's had a chance to speak, he is definitely folded in. I am off the Yang gang wagon, and I think he should just retire. And also, just before we get back to the thing, how about Mayor Pete getting dunked on? He better learn how to punt and play football, because he is done. Back to the debate.
On Election Day 20.
In Miami, we're going to continue the questioning now with Lester in the audience. We are in a second are going to have a question from Lester in the audience, but that was just a fake out.
Let's go. We're going to go to the issue of guns and.
Congressman Swalwell, among this field of candidates, you have a unique position on gun reform. You're proposing that the government should buy back every assault weapon in America, and it should be mandatory. How do you envision that working, especially in states where gun rights are a strong flashpoint?
Keep your pistols, keep your rifles, keep your shotguns, but we can take the most dangerous weapons from the most dangerous people. We have the NRA on the ropes because of the moms, because of the Brady Group, because of Giffords, because of March for Our Lives. But I'm the only candidate on this stage calling for a ban and buyback of every single assault weapon in America. I've seen the plans of the other candidates here. They would all leave 15 million assault weapons in our communities. They wouldn't do a single thing to save a single life in Parkland. I'll approach this issue as a prosecutor. I'll approach it as the only person on this stage who has voted and passed background checks, but also as a parent of a generation who sends our children to school where we look at what they're wearing so we can remember it in case we have to identify them later. A generation who has seen thousands of black children killed in our streets, and a generation who goes to the theater and we actually look where the fire exits are. We don't have to live this way. We must be a country who loves our children more than we love our guns.
Senator Sanders, a Vermont newspaper recently released portions of an interview you gave in 2013 in which you said, quote, "My own view on guns is everything being equal, states should make those decisions."
No.
Has your thinking changed since then? Do you now think there's a federal role to play?
That's a mischaracterization of my thinking.
It's a
Look,
quote of
we
you.
have a gun crisis right now. 40,000 people a year are getting killed. In 1988, Rachel, when it wasn't popular, I ran on a platform of banning assault weapons and, in fact, lost that race for Congress. I have a D- voting record from the NRA. And I believe that what we need is comprehensive gun legislation that, among other things, provides universal background. We end the gun show loophole. We end the straw man provision. And I believed in 1988, and I believe today.
Why would you leave 15 million on the streets?
Assault weapons are weapons from the military, and that they should not be on the streets of America.
Your plan leaves them on the streets. You leave 15 million on the streets.
We banned the sale and distribution, and that's what I believe for many years.
Will you buy them back?
If people want to buy, if the government wants to do that, and people want to
you're going to be the government,
yes.
will you buy them back?
Yes.
Senator Harris, we're going to give you 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think your idea is a great one, Congressman Swalwell, and I will say that there are a lot of great ideas. The problem is Congress has not had the courage to act, which is why when elected President of the United States, I will give the United States Congress 100 days to pull their act together, bring all these good ideas together, and put a bill on my desk for signature. And if they do not, I will take executive action, and I will put in place the most comprehensive background check policy we've had. I will require the ATF to take the licenses of gun dealers who violate the law, and I will ban by executive order the importation of assault weapons. Because I'm going to tell you, as a prosecutor, I have seen more autopsy photographs than I care to tell you. I have hugged more mothers who are the mothers of homicide victims, and I have attended more police officer funerals. It is enough. It is enough. There have been plenty of good ideas from members of the United States Congress. There's been no action. As president, I will take action.
Mayor Buttigieg, I want to bring you in on this, sir. A lot of discussion about assault rifles that are often shorthanded as military-style weapons. You are the only person on this stage tonight with military experience as a veteran of the Afghanistan war. Will military families, does that inform your thinking on this view? Do you believe that military families or America's veterans will, at large, have a different take on this than the other Americans who we've been talking about and who Congressman Swalwell is appealing to with his buyback program?
Yeah, of course, because we trained on some of these kinds of weapons. Look, every part of my life experience informs this. Being the mayor of a city where the worst part of the job is dealing with violence, we lose as many as were lost at Parkland every 2 or 3 years in my city alone. And this is tearing communities apart. If more guns made us safer, we'd be the safest country on earth. It doesn't work that way. And common sense measures like universal background checks can't seem to get delivered by Washington, even when most Republicans, let alone most Americans, agree it's the right thing to do. And as somebody who trained on weapons of war, I can tell you that there are weapons that have absolutely no place in American cities or neighborhoods in peacetime, ever.
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds.
A real 30 seconds?
A real 30 seconds.
Okay. I'm the only person that's beaten the NRA nationally. I'm the guy that got the Brady bill passed, the background checks, number one. Number two, we increased that background check during the Obama-Biden administration. I'm also the only guy that got assault weapons banned, and the number of clips in a gun banned. And so, folks, look, and I would buy back those weapons. We already started talking about that. We tried to get it done. I think it can be done, and it should be demanded that we do it, and that's a good expenditure of money. And lastly, we should have smart guns. No gun should be able to be sold unless your biometric measure could pull that trigger. It's within our right to do that. We can do that. Our enemy is the gun manufacturers, not the NRA. The gun manufacturers.
Vice President,
but the NRA is taking orders from the gun manufacturers.
Lester, hold Joel has our next question. Lester, take it away.
All right, Chuck, this is a question from our viewers. We put some suggestions that asked maybe they could share some. Here's one that came from Kathleen from Canby, Oregon, who writes, many fear the current administration has inflicted irrevocable harm on our governing institutions and norms, and in the process, on our reputation abroad. The question is, what do you see as important early steps in reversing the damage done? And we'll put this one to Senator Bennett.
Thank you very much. What an excellent question. First of all, we have to restore our democracy at home. The rest of the world is looking for us for leadership. We have a president who doesn't believe in the rule of law. He doesn't believe in freedom of the press. He doesn't believe in independent judiciary. He believes in the corruption that he's brought to Washington, D.C., and that is what we have to change, and that's why everybody is up here tonight, and I appreciate the fact that they're up here for that reason. Second, we've got to restore the relationships that he's destroyed with our allies, not just in Europe. He flew to the G20 last night and attacked Japan, Germany, and a third ally of ours without saying anything about North Korea or Russia. And when you've got a situation where you have a president who says something happened in the Straits of Hormuz and the whole world doesn't know whether to believe it or not, that is a huge problem when it comes to the national security of the United States of America.
This is a perfect time.
We need to change that.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. It's a perfect time for me to do another one of these down the line. And this is what this question is, which is you're likely going to have to reset a relationship between America and another country or entity if you become president perhaps because of some relationship that you just mentioned about President Trump. What is the first relationship you like to reset as president? I'm going to go down the line, and I'll start with Ms. Williamson.
Well, one of my first phone calls would be to call the European leaders and say, we're back. Because I totally understand how important it is that the United States be part of the Western Alliance.
I'm trying to get one or two words here. I hear you. Governor Hickenlooper.
You know, I talk about constant engagement, and I think the first country I would go to, but I understand they've been cheating and stealing intellectual property, would be China, because if we're going to deal with public health pandemics, if we're going to deal with all the challenges of the globe, we've got to have relationships with everyone.
Mr. Yang, we're trying to squeeze in a couple more things before we go to another break. Mr. Yang.
China, we need to cooperate with them on climate change, AI, and other issues. North Korea.
Thanks for the quickness. Mayor Buttigieg.
We have no idea which of our most important allies he will have pissed off worse between now and then. What we know is that our relationship with the entire world needs to change. And it starts by modeling American values at home.
Okay, Mr. Vice President, I'm trying to be quick.
We know NATO will fall apart if he's elected 4 more years as the single most consequential alliance in the history of the United States.
Senator Sanders.
It's not one country. I think it is rebuilding trust in the United Nations and understand that we can solve conflicts without war, but with diplomacy.
Senator Harris.
All the members of the NATO alliance.
Senator Gillibrand.
President Trump is hell-bent on starting a war with Iran. My first act will be to engage Iran to stabilize the Middle East and make sure we do not start an unwanted, never-ending war.
Senator Bennett, quickly.
Our European allies in every Latin American country that's willing to have a conversation about how to deal with the refugee crisis.
And Congressman Swalwell.
My first act in foreign policy, we're breaking up with Russia and making up with NATO.
Thank you all. Thank you all. We have one
That's a good plan.
last question for Vice President Biden tonight. You have made your decades of experience in foreign policy a pillar of your campaign. But when the time came to say yes or no on one of the most consequential foreign policy decisions of the last century, you voted for the Iraq war. You have since said you regret that vote. But why should voters trust your judgment when it comes to making a decision about taking the country to war the next time?
Because once Bush abused that power, what happened was we got elected after that. I made sure the president turned to me and said, Joe, get our combat troops out of Iraq. I was responsible for getting 150,000 combat troops out of Iraq, and my son was one of them. I also think we should not have combat troops in Afghanistan. It's long overdue. It should end. And thirdly, I believe that you're not going to find anybody who has pulled together more of alliances to deal with what is the real stateless threat out there. We cannot go it alone in terms of dealing with terrorism. So I'd eliminate the act that allowed us to go into war and not the AUMF, and make sure that it could only be used for what its intent was, and that is to go after terrorists, but never do it alone. That's why we have to repair our alliances. We put together 65 countries to make sure we dealt with ISIS in Iraq and other places. That's what I would do. That's what I have done, and I know how to do it.
Senator Sanders, 30 seconds.
One of the differences that Joe and I have in our record is Joe voted for that war. I helped lead the opposition to that war, which is a total disaster. Second of all, I helped lead the effort for the first time to utilize the War Powers Act to get the United States out of the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, which is the most horrific humanitarian disaster on earth. And thirdly, let me be very clear. I will do everything I can to prevent a war with Iran, which would be far worse than disastrous war with
Senator
Iraq.
Sanders, thank you.
All right, guys.
Informed consent of the American people.
Good news is you get more time to talk, but I have to sneak in one more break. We will be right back with more debate.
All right, well, I'm going to say that Bernie just rocked that out of the park with that answer, talking about, the contrast between the UN and Biden talking about NATO. Couldn't have been more clear as to how we need to approach our foreign policy. However, in looking at the whole debate so far, I'm really kind of liking the three women. Even though I don't necessarily like them, I like the way they're coming off. And I do think... coming at this from not being a Bernie Sanders fan, if I was just out there in the audience, I would say that Bernie and Joe are, not doing so well. And I don't know if anybody else has that opinion. Ron?
I was hoping for a little more from Bernie tonight. I do think he was really strong with that response to Biden. I thought he closed really strong. I thought that was good. So hopefully he finishes strong. But yeah, I feel like he's been a little... I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say silent. He's definitely been on it policy-wise, but as far as like some really good soundbitey moments, he just hasn't quite had them. And in the world we live in a soundbite world that we live in, those are just kind of necessary, and he hasn't quite had them as much tonight as I would have hoped he would have.
I tend to kind of, I don't know. I agree that Bernie could be a little bit more assertive. We've seen him be assertive, but I think it's because we constantly see him throwing these left punches all the time that when you put him in a room, it's just going to be the same thing because he's always doing it. He's not just doing this for show like the other people on stage are doing it. Kamala Harris, as you all know, have seen, has been pandering. If you go and Google the things she's saying, they just don't fall in line to her policy. So no matter how good she sounds, I'm not going to go and give her really much of a thumbs up because I know that she's pandering and lying. Kirsten Gillibrand, too. Like, she's actually been doing a lot better than I expected. She's been taking on the points of staying off of Iran, talking about paid family leave. She's definitely using the female, I'm a woman card. But if you look at her policy and her past legislation, it is problematic when she's talking about not taking corporate money when that's just not the case. Yeah. Marianne Williamson, though, I think she definitely got out of her shell. And she's a little bit kind of like all over the place, kind of like very like scatterbrained. And she's not a politician, and you can tell. But I think she adds some different perspective to the table. I think Bernie Sanders
5 seconds
can totally go stronger next time as far as war, as far as being anti-war and tying it to immigration.
I'll lead off next week.
We are back from Miami. Now, each candidate will have a final chance to make their case to the voters. 45 seconds each. We begin with Congressman Swalwell.
We can't be a forward-looking party if we look to the past for our leadership. I'm a congressman, but also a father of a 2-year-old and an infant. When I'm not changing diapers, I'm changing Washington. Most of the time, the diapers smell better. I went to Congress at 31, and I found a Washington that doesn't work for people like you and me. It's made of the rich and the disconnected. I was the first in my family to go to college and have student loan debt. And so I have led the effort to elect the next generation of members of Congress, and we have a moment to seize. This is a can-do generation. This is the generation that will end climate chaos. This is the generation that will solve student loan debt. And this is the generation that will say enough is enough and end gun violence. This generation demands bold solutions. That's why I'm running for president.
Congressman, thank you.
Ms. Williamson, 45 seconds for your closing
I'm
statement.
sorry we haven't talked more tonight about how we're going to beat Donald Trump. I have an idea about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not going to be beaten just by insider politics talk. He's not going to be beaten just by somebody who has plans. He's going to be beaten by somebody who has an idea what this man has done. This man has reached into the psyche of the American people, and he has harnessed fear for political purposes. So, Mr. President, if you're listening, I want you to hear me, please. You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. So sir, I have a feeling you know what you're doing. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field, and, sir, love will win.
Ms. Williamson, thank you.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you. My mom and her parents came to the United States to rebuild their shattered lives in the only country that they could. 300 years before that, my parents' family came searching religious freedom here. The ability for one generation to do better than the next is now severely at risk in the United States, especially among children living in poverty like the ones I used to work for in the Denver public schools. That's why I'm running for president. I've had 2 tough races in Colorado by bringing people together, not by making empty promises. And I believe we need to build a broad coalition of Americans to beat Donald Trump, end the corruption in Washington, and build a new era of American democracy and American opportunity. This is going to be hard to do, but it's what our parents would have expected. It's what our kids deserve. I hope you'll join me in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Hickenlooper.
I'm a small business owner who brought that same scrappy spirit to make Colorado one of the most progressive states in America. We expanded reproductive health to reduce teenage abortion by 64%. We were the first state to legalize marijuana, and we transformed our justice system in the process. We passed universal background checks in a purple state. We got to near universal health care coverage. We attacked climate change with the toughest methane regulations in the country, and for the last 3 years, we've been the #1 economy in America. You don't need big government to do big things. I know that because I'm the one person up here who's actually done the big progressive things everyone else is talking about. If we turn towards socialism, we run the risk of helping to re-elect the worst president in American history.
Thank you, Governor.
Senator Gillibrand, you have the floor for 45 seconds.
Women in America are on fire. We've marched, we've organized, we've run for office, and we've won. But our rights are under attack like never before by President Trump and the Republicans who want to repeal Roe v. Wade, which is why I went to the front lines in Georgia to fight for them. As president, I will take on the fights that no one else will. I stood up to the Pentagon and repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I've stood up to the banks and voted against the bailout twice. I've stood up to Trump more than any other senator in the U.S. Senate. And I have the most comprehensive approach for getting money out of politics with publicly funded elections to deal with political corruption. Now is not the time to play it safe. Now is not the time to be afraid of firsts. We need a president who will take on the big challenges, even if she stands alone. Join me in fighting for this.
Senator Gillibrand, thank you.
Mr. Yang, you have 45 seconds for your closing.
First, I want to thank everyone who put me on this stage tonight. I am proof that our democracy still works. Democrats and Americans around the country have one question for their nominee, and that is who can beat Donald Trump in 2020? That is the right question. And the right candidate to beat Donald Trump will be solving the problems that got Donald Trump elected and will have a vision of a trickle-up economy that is already drawing thousands of disaffected Trump voters, conservatives, independents, and libertarians, as well as Democrats and progressives. I am that candidate. I can build a much broader coalition to beat Donald Trump. It is not left. It is not right. It is forward. And that is where I'll take the country in 2020.
Mr. Yang, thank you.
Senator Harris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I just want to leave you with a couple of things. One, we need a nominee who has the ability to prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump, and I will do that. Second, this election is about you. This is about your hopes and your dreams and your fears and what wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's why I have what I call a 3 a.m. agenda. That is about everything from what we need to do to deliver health care, to how you will be able to pay the bills by the end of the month. And when I think about what our country needs, I promise you, I will be a president who leads with a sense of dignity, with honesty, speaking the truth, and giving the American family all that they need to get through the end of the month in a way that allows them to prosper. So I hope to earn your support. Please join us at KamalaHarris.org.
Senator, thank you.
Mayor Buttigieg, 45 seconds.
Nothing about politics is theoretical for me. I've had the experience of writing a letter to my family, putting it in an envelope marked just in case, and leaving it where they would know where to find it in case I didn't come back from Afghanistan. I have the experience of being in a marriage that exists by the grace of a single vote on the U.S. Supreme Court. I have the experience of guiding a community where the per capita income was below $20,000 when I took office into a brighter future. I'm running because the decisions we make in the next 3 or 4 years are going to decide how the next 30 or 40 go. And when I get to the current age of the current president in the year 2055, I want to be able to look back on these years and say my generation delivered climate solutions, racial equality, and an end to endless war. Help me deliver that new generation to Washington before it's too late.
Thank you.
Senator Sanders, 45 seconds, the floor is yours.
I suspect people all over the country who are watching this debate are saying, these are good people, they have great ideas. But how come nothing really changes? How come for the last 45 years wages have been stagnant for the middle class? How come we have the highest rate of childhood poverty? How come 45 million people still have student debt? How come 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America? And here is the answer. Nothing will change unless we have the guts to take on Wall Street, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the military-industrial complex, and the fossil fuel industry. If we don't have the guts to take them on, we'll continue to have plans, we'll continue to have talk, and the rich will get richer, and everybody else will be struggling.
Thank you, Senator.
And lastly, we'll hear from Vice President Biden. Sir, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you very much. I'm running to lead this country because I think it's important we restore the soul of this nation. This president has ripped it out. It's the only president in our history who has equated racist and white supremacist with ordinary and decent people. He's the only president who has engaged and embraced dictators and thumbed their nose at our allies. I'm secondly running for president because I think we have to restore the backbone of America, the poor and hardworking middle-class people. You can't do that without replacing them with the dignity they once had. Lastly, we got to unite the United States of America as much as anybody says we can. If we do, there's not a single thing the American people can't do. This is the United States of America. We can do anything if we're together. So God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Vice President Biden, thank you.
We want to thank our candidates. We've had 2 nights of spirited debate on a range of issues, 20 candidates in all. We want to thank all of the candidates last night.
Seriously, it takes guts to run and stick your neck out like this to you guys and to the 10 last night. Thanks for having the guts to do this.
I would also like to thank the audience for completely ignoring our suggestion not to react. We made it a lot more fun.
Also, thanks to the Democratic National Committee and the Florida Democratic Party.
And of course, thank you to
Back
everyone
in.
at the Adrian R.
Okay,
Center for
so
hosting
there
us
you
here and
go.
our
This was
terrific
night
audience.
2 of the first set of debates of the Democratic primary candidates, and we all are going to comment about them now. I was interested to note that they did not have one single question about the revolutionary policy that is going to get everyone in America to support Bernie Sanders, which is that forgiving student debt. They didn't want to even put that question out there because they knew if he got to articulate that it would skyrocket him in popularity. Also, I was surprised that they didn't go after the socialism thing. Hickenlooper kept trying to bring it up and kept getting boos, but I think that's his trademark now. But also, I thought it was very interesting at the end that Joe Biden was talking about racism, considering that he was not just supporting Eastland, who is a segregationist, but he had his own animosity towards busing and brought in Eastland and other segregationists to support him against busing, which would have integrated American schools and would have been a very major step to combat racism, because integration, as I said yesterday, is the only thing proven to have lowered the gap in test scores between minorities and whites, and it also, when white students go to school with black students, it decreases racism on their part. Ron.
No, I was supposed to
Oh,
start
it's your
up.
turn?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Pasta.
Appreciate it. Well, I'm going to just do a quick breakdown before I pass it on over real quick. I just want to point out some winners and losers today. I really think the losers today were Hickenlooper and Bennett. Just done. Get out of here. I really was disappointed in Andrew Yang. I thought he just fizzled today, didn't do anything for me. Some people that really kind of moved up their status. I got to tell you, Swalwell going at Pete Buttigieg today, I really, really like that. Plus, he has a little bit of plans on guns. He actually, I think, catered his answers towards Florida because that's where they were. And Gillibrand, even though we know she's full of shit, we kind of know her policies. She sounded good today. I think she's going to do well for herself. And Marianne Williams, despite that closing remarks, which I thought were pretty weak, she had a good showing. And I just want to say this much, guys. When it comes to Bernie Sanders, don't be... What's the word? Don't be so disappointed, because he had a couple great moments tonight. And a lot of times when you watch these debates, it doesn't catch you. Last night when Tulsi did her thing, we were like, hey, that was good, but it really didn't hit home until we got home. We saw how she was trending on Google. We saw the clip playing over and over again, and you watch it back and how she just had Tim Ryan all messed up. Bernie Sanders had this moment today while everybody was yelling, and he started speaking, and everybody shut up. And he looked very presidential, like he was a school teacher telling them to hush down. So I think you're going to see that clip over and over and over again. As a progressive, I am a little disappointed in the Honduras thing. He talked about Honduras, but he didn't make the connection, and Marianne Williamson did. So that is just my overall assessment. And now I'm going to pass it to Ronald Paclone.
Oh, okay. We're going to, okay. So I thought Bernie finished really strong. At the last break, I said, I wish he would be a little more, like, have a few kind of nice soundbitey moments. I felt like in his closer he did. I thought it was a very strong closer. Marianne Williamson did have some great moments. I totally agree with you. The closer got a little weird. I thought she was going to start casting a spell. I did not know what was going on. Joe Biden, every single thing Joe Biden said virtually, he could have said 10 years ago, and it would have sounded milquetoast even back then. I think it's just ridiculous. Andrew Yang, when Andrew Yang was like, I'd like to thank everyone for getting me to this debate stage. This is proof democracy still works. I honestly thought for a split second the next thing he was going to say is, and now I'm suspending my campaign. Like, I honestly thought, like, he did just kind of seem checked out. Like, he just wasn't ready for that moment, really. But, and this is... When I say this, I am speaking strictly from a debate standpoint. I don't mean because, as Fiorella pointed out in the last break, everything this person has said, most of her actions have contradicted her words. But strictly from a debate standpoint, Kamala Harris really came ready tonight. She really, and I am not a Kamala Harris fan, but she was ready. And again, a lot of the things she says, her actions do not back that up at all. But from a debate standpoint, she was really ready, and she had some big moments, and I have a feeling she's going to be the establishment favorite here coming up. She's going to be the next person that the establishment kind of bestows their blessing upon.
Yeah.
Biden's run, I think, is kind of over. She's going to be next. It's going to be her next round.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Just to piggyback off of you, I think Kamala Harris definitely would, to the non-information, not the non-heavily informed voter, she's going to be the one who looks good, who looks like she did everything well, because she knows how to read a room. She's a prosecutor. She knows how to pander to whoever needs to be pandered to, and she did exactly what she needed to do to up herself. Because if you guys remember the California convention, she really didn't have a huge night. Everybody thought she was going to fail tonight, and she actually picked herself up, and she's actually coming back up. So,
yeah. You could see from the chart, Marianne Williamson pretty high. A lot of people looking on.
The search terms?
Yeah,
yeah. Marianne Williamson, the highest. I would agree with that. And Kamala Harris, and I agree. Kirsten Gillibrand, absolutely.
Yeah, I looked her up because when she said that she voted against the bank bailouts twice, I was kind of shocked about that. But she actually did. She voted against the bank bailouts when she was a congresswoman representing New York. She also co-sponsored the financial transaction tax. She supported reinstating a new Glass-Steagall Act. So, And we remember her, she took a lot of hits when she called for Al Franken to step down, and a lot of liberals and progressives were supporting Al Franken because they thought he was so good. And I'm like, no, you have to be consistent. If this behavior in the Me Too movement is not okay in Republicans, it's not okay in Democrats. And she took a lot of hits over that, but that's been a consistent issue for her. Now, of course, she does have a very, very conservative background. She has made a transition. Now, the question is, my hashtag for her is Chameleon Kirsten. The question is it an evolution, which we can honestly say, great, she evolved to take the right stance, or is it all for political gain? That's a question that people need to look into with her, because I think she came out of this looking very well.
I agree.
What about Biden? Where do we stand on Biden? What do you guys think in the audience? Because I don't know.
I think as soon as you
to the audience, line up.
I think as soon as you said Biden, I heard a collective yawn from all of us.
Okay, Brian.
Hi everybody. So my name is Brian. I was a former Bernie delegate. I've been here with
Take my seat.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, Brian.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lauren. And thank you for hosting all of us in the audience tonight. So I have to say, watching Joe Biden's debate performance tonight, he really got pummeled on. He got dogpiled by a lot of the different candidates. And, a lot of the different candidates, when they're dogpiling on him, they made a lot of good points about his past and his record. So I think Joe Biden is one of the big losers in the debate tonight.
Anyone else want to share their viewpoints? Yes. Okay.
If you guys have a chance, open up your phones, go to the CONVO couch.
Why don't you say what you did for Bernie at his last rally?
I performed not the national anthem, but with America the Beautiful at the last Bernie rally in LA. I'm a performer. But the one thing I just wanted to say about Biden is nobody called him on being one of the architects of the crime bill, which was singularly the...
He touted it. He touted himself, yeah.
Well, it's
he bragged
funny.
about it.
But in terms of its impact on race relations
Absolutely.
and the community of people of color, that's been one of the worst policies. So I hope that gets that he gets called out on that.
You know the disgusting thing about Biden? The disgusting thing about Biden is that the other candidates really don't attack him on policy. They attack him on rhetoric, his language, his views, but they never attack him on his policy. Why? Because they're in line with his policies. That's why.
Well, it's funny. At one point, they said he was the one of the architects of Obamacare, and he wasn't. Mitt Romney was.
Yeah,
so they got that wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I love my favorite line of this was, I'm not changing diapers, I'm changing Washington. I mean, you got to think, how long did he prepare for delivering that line? And
No one in his family told him that was lame. Like, nobody. He had to have run that by someone, and no one was like, oh.
Right?
Well, Swalwell tried to call out Bernie Sanders today, I think Swalwell made some points for himself, and you're going to see his name rise up a little bit. He was one of the...
He failed at calling him out.
I don't know about that particular point. When he did call him out, I thought he made some impact. When he talked about buying back the guns, he kind of caught...
No, because
Bernie
the Brady.
in a position.
Let's talk about the Brady bill. They brought up the Brady bill again. That bill is something that's always brought up in relation to Bernie Sanders, because when he was in Vermont, he was trying not to punish the people who sold the guns, the manufacturers, the people, the shop owners, and that was the way that's the way he did it. A lot of people in America, in Vermont in particular, aren't comfortable with hearing the fact that you're going to ban every single gun and that you're going to punish every single person that has a shop or that owns a gun. But the Democratic establishment always loves using that to say that Bernie Sanders is pro-gun, that the NRA loves him. And another thing I wanted to point out was that the NRA, Biden defended the NRA, saying the NRA is not the problem. And that's something that's very telling, because you got to look at where the money's coming from as well.
Yeah.
So
I think he made the direct line, the fact that he's blaming manufacturers, which is what Bernie says. He won't hold the manufacturers accountable, maybe with the Brady bill. But yet the NRA gives him a D-, and Joe's not, he's not blaming the NRA. So he made a specific distinction between him and Bernie, I think, for voters out there. I don't know why he's trying to play that path, because I don't think it's going to help him. But that's what I think he was doing right there in that case.
Yeah, I want to say that anybody who's watching on any of our streams, my Facebook, my YouTube, if you have any questions that you would like us to address, please, put them in the comments.
Or our Facebook or our YouTube, The Convo Couch. Please let us know.
I got a question.
Yes.
When they said about Bernie, when they were talking about the Roe versus Wade, his answer, like, what would Bernie do? Again, I guess I put this out to you. If they did change it, where it was overturned, like, what can we do to still have that to be accessible for women? I mean, are we totally fucked? Like, it's almost like Bernie totally kicked
No, because it's the states. If you overturn Roe versus Wade, it goes back to the states, and that's the way.
So it's not effective.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make abortion illegal.
It was a bad question. It really doesn't. There was nowhere to go.
Well, what I'm saying, I guess, if the Supreme Court overturns it, that they don't make that doesn't suddenly become illegal in the country to have an abortion, right? Or that's what I thought.
It goes
think
back
it
to the
returns
states.
it back to the states.
But the way he answered it's advocating for if we have Medicare for all, that's going to cover abortions. That would be another way to protect it, to protect women for
I
that.
thought if they overturned it, then that means it's now a federal law in this country. No, that's a whole other process.
No, it just doesn't have the protection of being completely federally.
It was a very poor question, and I think the way he kind of deflected it back and took it back for Medicare for all was actually pretty strategically.
Me too.
It was
Yeah.
smart on his part. It was well done.
Guys, come up to the microphone and say the question, if you can. Yeah. Jimmy Dore can't hear you.
Jimmy! No, I was just curious because someone had answered.
Into the microphone, sir.
Oh, there you go. That somebody had said that when Bernie was asked that question, that was not such a great response. And I guess where I went to, maybe not knowing fully the laws, that if it was overturned,
Roe v. Wade is what we're talking about.
Roe v.
Just
Wade. Roe v. Wade for women's right. That all of a sudden the women would not be able to still be able to have an abortion because then that would change at a federal level. So that is, I guess, what I'm hearing, that's not accurate, correct? If Roe v. Wade is overturned, then it goes back to the states, which you guys are
Correct,
telling
and
me.
then they would have to decide for themselves.
So he should have said, just move to California. That should have been his answer. Which was kind of like the
way he
gotcha
handled
question.
it
He
was
was
the
the
right
best.
way. It was-
Yeah. That and the
it was a poor
buyback of the
question.
automatic assault weapons, I think that caught him off guard with Swalwell a little bit. But other than that, I think he was pretty damn good. Lauren,
All right,
question.
we got a question from Miranda Sierra. Who are you looking forward to seeing in the next debate? Who would you choose to move forward? Or another way of posing that question is, who are we kicking off the island?
The Hickenlooper
for sure.
Wait, but he's a scientist and a businessman. Didn't you hear him?
He got pot legalized.
Bennett is another one.
You
too.
got to go to my YouTube channel because Hickenlooper and I went to the same college. We went to Wesleyan University, and 5 years ago we were at our reunion together. Now he's 5 years older than I am, but he was giving a talk on the legalization of marijuana, and I went to it, and I made sure I got in the front row. And my first question to him was about fracking. And I said to him, and I already knew what his answer was going to be, so I incorporated my question into his answer, which was, you sued or threatened to sue 4 Colorado towns for banning fracking, and your reason was that you had to protect the mineral rights of the people who owned it. Why were you more concerned about protecting the corporation's mineral rights than the health of the people of your community? And he literally went on for 6.5 minutes with this word salad answer about his regulations and how he was going to work with the fossil fuel industry. And that was another thing that I was disappointed about.
Did he at any point tell you that water is socialist? Did he?
I didn't talk about that.
He didn't do that?
And he didn't
Okay.
talk about how he drank frack fluid, to prove that it was not, that
Wait,
it
he
was,
did that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, you got to Google that.
Oh, I did not know that about him.
But here's the thing. I mean, he is just it's just unbelievable. And Michael Bennet too, Democratic senator from Colorado, actually joined the Republicans in their resolution. This was a non-binding resolution, mind you, but it was still a resolution to approve the Keystone XL pipeline, and Michael Bennet signed on to that resolution because Colorado is an oil and gas state. So all you need to do is look at their records. But
Yeah.
is Chuck Todd or Rachel Maddow gonna, tell you about that? No, you're only gonna find that on the Robust Opposition, the Convo Couch, and
Get your news on with Ron. Lauren's a big fan.
Somebody online.
She tunes in every episode.
Somebody online called him Frackenlooper.
Yeah, his nickname is Governor Frackenlooper.
Yeah.
I mean, he's really got to go.
Who are your top two? Who do you think did the best from yesterday's debate and today's debate?
Bernie Tulsi.
I think it was Bernie Tulsi on the progressive side, but I think Marianne Williamson is a rising star, and Kamala Harris and Cory Booker probably upped their game as well.
You know, I need to make some comments about Marianne Williamson because I actually know her, and I just don't want her to get too much kudos for this because Marianne Williamson invited Bernie Sanders to the Sister Giant event, which she has every year, and that was in 2015 in Los Angeles. And that's when a lot of people decided to come on the Bernie Sanders bandwagon. And I give Marianne a lot of credit because she is they always want to minimize her by calling her a motivational guru or whatever they call her, but she's all about that sort of self-help and improvement, and she makes money selling that. You pay pay for her books, you pay for her courses and seminars. But here's the thing, she didn't really do anything to work for Bernie Sanders, and after that run, she ran herself, or maybe it was before, she challenged Ted Lieu for Congress. And then after, she just kind of disappeared, went back to New York, went back into her private business, and didn't really do anything to advance any of our fights. And that's what I look at. When I look at the people that are involved in the Bernie Sanders movement, they're fighting fracking, they're fighting for racial justice, they're fighting for income inequality. And she just didn't stay in the fight, only to come back again for running for president. So it makes me just a little bit concerned about her. I mean, she does talk the talk, but you have to look at, did she walk the walk? And I don't think she really did. I mean, unless you
Are we all being quiet? Do you want me to say something? Well, I'm going to say that she, her line of work, what she does is self-healing, helping people. Every day she gets to help society, help the world, just the way we interact with each other from a spiritual way. I've always said from the get-go that we need a spiritual revolution as well as a political revolution here. The way we talk to each other, the way we handle things, the way we do things. I'm sorry for hitting down, Johnny. Marianne Williamson is all about that. I've read some of her stuff before in the past. I've met her. And even though she didn't go out and, march in the streets as an activist like some of us, her work, her life work is about helping people and helping people understand their spirituality and how they love each other. Did somebody say something?
Well, I think she's got her lane,
Yeah.
Brian?
Come up to the microphone to comment, yeah.
Okay.
Hello again.
Hello again, yeah. So this isn't about any one particular candidate in general, but it's just something for all of us to keep in mind is that the DNC changed their rules because I was a former Bernie delegate, actually in Lawrence district. We were both fellow delegates together. So I was right in the middle of it in 2016. And they changed the rules of how they nominate the nominee from 2016. The rules are different now from the way it was done 3 years ago. So we have a first ballot now where the superdelegates are not allowed to vote on who the nominee is. It is purely the state delegates and the pledged delegates. It is not the superdelegates like, the governors and the Congress people. All of the people who were pro-establishment last time, they will not get a vote on the first round, only on the second round. And we would get to a second round if any candidate does not make 51% of the pledged delegate vote or past that.
Yeah.
So it's very important because we have so many of these candidates, and I'm not the only one saying this. I've heard other people say the same thing, that this seems like having this many candidates, 20 plus candidates for one side. After we've had this rules change, it's a great way to fracture the progressive base. Oh, well, Kamala Harris sounded great. Maybe I'll support her. Oh, Marianne Williamson sounded really good. Maybe I'll go to her. And so it fractionalizes the progressive base. And if we have too much of that fractionalization, we're doing the establishment's work for them. We're taking the bait. So we need to formulate around one candidate. And I think that candidate is Bernie Sanders. I think he's the strongest candidate of all the 20 plus because he's been in the fight since many of the people in this audience have been alive for more than 50 years, from racial justice to environmental justice to all of the different healthcare for all of the different issues. He's always been there from the very start. And he almost made it in 2016. I think he's one of the last people to make it this time around. And so I think it's very important for us to coalesce all of our energies and all of our bodies towards one person, and I think that person's Bernie.
But what do you think about the point of having a debate? Sorry, give him applause. I'm sorry. Give him applause. I mean, what is the point of a primary, though? You know, isn't it the reason why, you know, open about it, that I'm supporting Tulsi right now over Bernie Sanders, and I suspect that in the end it might be Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump, and I'll be ready to vote for Bernie Sanders. But just what Bernie Sanders showed tonight, that he has work to do, especially when it comes to foreign policy and regime change. So I'm not ready to put all my eggs in the Bernie Sanders basket until he moves even further to the left on those issues.
Wait, can I say something? Please. I'm going to say something to respond to that. I wholly believe we need to differentiate between progressives that are standing in the way of Bernie, or not even progressives, I would call them progressives that are standing in the way of Bernie, and people that are allies to him. If we remember in 2016, Tulsi Gabbard stepped down from power, from being the Democratic vice chair. She was actually going to be implemented in the DNC as chair of the Democratic National Party. And she stepped down and gave all of that up to be completely ousted by the Democratic Party to endorse Bernie Sanders. She was one of very few people who did that. Not saying the same thing about Elizabeth Warren. As of right now, I feel that Bernie's biggest threat, the person that's siphoning votes away from him, the person that is giving people the alternative to say, oh, this is pretty good. Let's do it. Let's unite. It's not really a unity with Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is going there to win. She signed a letter urging Hillary Clinton to run in 2016. She never intended on voting for Bernie Sanders. I don't think that that's the same thing as you supporting someone that I don't think has the power and the establishment behind them. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't have Third Way behind her. She doesn't have Neera Tanden behind her. She doesn't have the entire mainstream media behind her. We have to look and see at who's actually standing in the way of Bernie and siphoning votes. And if you're a Bernie supporter, I'm not saying you go and trash Elizabeth Warren. You always keep it about policy. But it is our job now to completely look at who's got the better policy, who's got the better student loan plan. That is Bernie Sanders. That's not Elizabeth Warren. And so, now it's the moment where I agree with you. I think we do need to find some sort of unison. And I think that is why they put out so many establishment Democrats, because they want it to get to the second vote so they can go and say, oh, Bernie didn't get enough. And so then they can prop up their candidate. And I believe Elizabeth Warren is helping to get that candidate, whether it's Harris or Biden, because that's what it's looking like to me after this debate.
Well, and I'll say this too.
Warren, come and screen, by the way. I'm so sorry, guys. Yeah, thank you.
It's not I do not believe for 1 second that it's a coincidence that Warren and Bernie were not on the same night. They were on 2 different nights because they want you to think that Elizabeth Warren is some big progressive with all these plans. Even Chuck Todd was saying it when he was asking the questions. You got a plan for this? You got a plan for this? Yeah, that she kind of siphoned off of Bernie. So they want people to think that Elizabeth Warren is, pretty much just Bernie. And Bernie's... We're all going to have to really work so that people realize that's not true.
Well, I want to talk about that after I make this rebuttal point to Pasta, which is Bernie has work to do on foreign policy. When Tulsi was a little girl in diapers, I don't even know if she was born in the 1980s. I mean, we have to figure it out.
Here we go.
But
1981.
Bernie was going down to Nicaragua and meeting with Daniel Ortega because he was supporting the Sandinistas.
Absolutely. And tonight he couldn't even say Manuel Zelaya's name.
Well,
he couldn't even point to 2009 when he said all this bad stuff's happening in Honduras, and they removed the socially democratic elected leader, and that was Barack Obama.
Okay,
but she didn't tie it to him either.
They're only giving him 30 seconds here, and he had an entire speech. I think one of the most underappreciated speeches of all of the 2016 campaign was his foreign policy speech that he delivered at Georgetown University. And he went through the entire history of U.S. regime change wars, from overthrowing Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala, and Mossadegh in Iran, and Allende in Chile. Bernie totally gets it, okay? Now, he's not sitting here on the debate stage to give a history lesson to people, and that point was already made by somebody else about Honduras. So I feel like my issue with Bernie is two things that are going to trip him up. And I feel he really needs some help with messaging on this. And one of them is socialism, because he got behind that word when he's really not a socialist. He's he's not even a democratic socialist. He's a social democrat, or better yet, an FDR-style Democrat. And that's what he should start calling himself, because everybody remembers what FDR did. And FDR, in fact, saved capitalism, okay? And everybody knows that. Wait a minute, let me make another point. And the other thing is political revolution, okay? Revolution is a scary word for most of Americans. He's not talking about a revolution like a violent revolution in the street. When he says political revolution, we know that because we've been listening to him for 4 years. He means average citizens getting involved. And Elizabeth Warren alluded to it last night when she was asked, how are you going to overcome Mitch McConnell, who's going to block everything that you say? And Elizabeth Warren said, we're going to get the people behind us. And that is what Bernie Sanders has said. When I heard him in 2015 at Mimi Kennedy's house at a fundraiser in Van Nuys, they asked the same question, only then it was John Boehner. How are you going to get John Boehner to go for single-payer health care, Bernie? And he said, because I'm going to point outside the window and show, look at those million people out there on the National Mall, who want it. So who is going to be the best one to mobilize the people? And in that thing, I do agree with you. I think Bernie has a much better ability because he's running a movement campaign, or he should be running a movement campaign. We've got some things we got to talk about in Los Angeles here. But, Elizabeth Warren doesn't know how to run that campaign. I went to her thing in Glendale. It was her kickoff, her California organizing meeting, and she wasn't even taking names. She wasn't even saying, everybody sign up, here's how you can get involved, here's how you can start a group. It was just an opportunity for her to give a speech and have her cute little grandson Atticus pick numbers out of a hat, which, is starting to get a little old with me. But anyway, go on.
Well, and, just if I can piggyback on that for 1 second, Bernie's kind of the reason that we're all here. What Bernie really did at the end of the day, which is huge and cannot be understated, I was for single-payer healthcare before I even knew who Bernie Sanders was. I supported Kucinich in 2008. What Bernie Sanders did, he did not give me my political views, but he kind of pulled a little bit of wool off my eyes to make me realize I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. And that's what he did for all of us.
Mm-hmm. I just want to point out that I feel like what you're saying is he needs to be scared of the word socialism, and I don't agree with that. I think he's actually done a good job of taking away the fear of that word. This is why he's getting Hickenlooper is getting booed on stage when he says the words I don't want socialism, I don't want this, because this generation, the millennial generation and the Generation Z, we don't care about the word socialism. We're not afraid of it. We're embracing it because capitalism hasn't worked for us. It continues sinking us further, and we're not going to sit back and be afraid of a word. I want to unveil the word socialism, and I think Bernie is unveiling that, and I don't think he needs to focus on it as much, but I do agree with you that he is an FDR Democrat in general, because if you put him in the grand scheme of the world, he's actually really not even a socialist.
Yeah.
But I think he's done a great job of introducing that word, of taking off the red baiting that has existed since the 1950s, since McCarthyism, and now with Russiagate, the neo-McCarthy smears that have been ongoing. And I really love that he's done that. And I don't want him to go and placate to centrists. That is not the way to win. He's going to win by having hardcore leftist policies that apply to the working class and building a people's movement. The revolution, the word, that excites us. That's why we're all here. Our revolution. That is what brings momentum. It's not about holding back, but about being honest and pushing it forward.
You said you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think people keep saying, how do we beat Trump? The only way to beat Trump is to expand the electorate, because he doesn't have an actual majority, and the demographic of non-voters is the biggest demographic. We need to be thinking about who can expand the electorate.
Yeah. Can I say something? I want to. Well, we still have a little bit of time before we have to go to the thing, right? We still have 6-7 minutes. Who can expand the electorate, right? We talk about this all the time, and one of the reasons why I do like Tulsi is because Tulsi gets and she pulls votes that Bernie Sanders will never get. She gets libertarians that come on over that are upset with Trump.
Bernie gets libertarians.
Some, but not as many as that Tulsi gets. I mean, I've gone to many Bernie rallies. I see him get some libertarians, but Tulsi gets a slew of them. She even gets a slew of Republican voters that are coming over that are disgruntled for Donald Trump.
So does Bernie.
And here's
Wait,
my question.
Pasta, doesn't it concern you that 40% of the people watching on Drudge support Tulsi?
I feel like that's a cheap thing to say.
No, it's a cheap shot. I'm not going to go there and measure the integrity of every single voter that votes for somebody. Okay, there's some people that will vote for Bernie that I'm not going to like.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to sit there. I mean, really, we're talking about another level if you're going to start looking in and judging everybody who votes for them. If
She's
she
not
gets
going to
the
get
votes,
the nomination.
she won't. But what she will do is she'll get a bunch of votes. Now, who do we know for sure if they drop out? If Elizabeth Warren drops out, are you all out there ready to tell me that she's going to give those votes to Bernie? If Tulsi drops out, who are those votes going to? You know that. And that is what we're also talking. This is political strategy here too as well that we have to pay attention to. And one last thing. I love Bernie. Bernie's bae. I don't want to argue that. I want you to know that. But Bernie hasn't even mentioned or talked about his number one issue. And that's election integrity. 2016, people are still looking for accountability. He still hasn't addressed the cheating within the Democratic Party in 2016, and
Yes,
yet
he did. He addressed it with Cassie Hunt, and he was castigated.
I did not see this. I did not see that
yeah,
report.
he said it recently.
He did.
This was very recent. Yeah.
So I have to watch the Cassie Hunt report. But up until then, people were screaming, "When are you going to address it?" So
I just wanted to do one quick thing. We were talking about the electorate. I think what the Democratic Party is gone wrong, and where, again, I think here with all the pundits and all the mainstream media, is that they're still talking about this small little sliver of 2 to 3, 4% who sway elections. You know, where I think Bernie has got like a lot of the momentum is the 100 million people who did not vote, who feel disenfranchised. Like, instead of going for this small percentage, we have to go for the big old pie of, again, the things that he's talking about are for that 100 million. 100 million people did not vote. So I think if we can still unplug as best as we can from this mainstream media narrative and the establishment's democratic machine that keeps going back and forth with this small little group of like, well, okay, this is it. No, we have to put that aside and go really after the big fish, the big pond is the 100 million people. And that there definitely can get Bernie elected more than I think any other candidate, because no other candidate is talking to that 100 million more than Bernie Sanders.
And we're going to talk about how to do that.
I think we have to leave that up on. Give him a round of applause. Everybody,
Yeah.
Lauren Steiner for holding it down. Ron Pacone, get your news on with Ron. Fiorella Isabel, do you have a question? Go ahead. I thought you wanted to get on 8:30. My bad.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's
You have to
more
do that
a
again.
question for each of you, because maybe to talk me down a little bit. I just get the feeling Bernie's in trouble. And I was speaking to Lauren about this before. It's more anecdotal. People I campaigned with for Bernie 4 years ago don't seem as enthused, and some are drifting away. And you know what I was waiting for him to do, because he's standing on that stage, if he said, how many of you were for universal health care 4 years ago? How many of you were for universal pre-K? How many of you were for canceling college debt? Is he not saying that because that would be maybe repelling those people from coming to his issue? Or is he not saying it out of politeness? Because I think if he said it, I think it would be very effective. I'm just wondering if all of you think the same.
I feel like you've said it in all of his speeches that he's done in every rally. He's pretty much talked about, back then, 4 years ago, our ideas were too radical. He's constantly talked about it. And I feel like in this time frame of the debates, he didn't really have as much of a chance to actually lay out every single thing that he gets to talk about in his speeches. That's just my opinion.
I don't think it's this is my optimistic side speaking, but I don't think it's necessarily a lack of enthusiasm. I think that everybody, and I include myself in this, we're just a little more cautious this time around because we remember what happened in 2016. And we know that the reform was only so much of a, quote, reform. And we know that the establishment is going to do everything they can to make sure Bernie doesn't get that nomination. So we're really proceeding with caution this time. And if we don't have the biggest unified front, that includes people who don't normally vote and everyone else, there's not a chance. So I think that people are really proceeding with caution.
Yeah.
And, but I don't think that's a lack of enthusiasm. At least I hope not.
Can I say this much too? It ain't a race. It's a marathon. It's a long way to go. I think the enthusiasm will pick up as we get deeper into this race,
Oh,
as
yeah.
we get deeper into these debates. The people will come out. Right now, everybody's just consumed with work and trying to pay the bills and try to do what they got to do. I mean, it's those political junkies like us who get to come out right now and get to do this right now. And I want to thank you guys for allowing us to do this right now. Are we done with this now? Can we clap again? Or all right. Thank you, Lauren Steiner, for hosting us. Fiorella Isabel, my co-host. Ron Placone of Get Your News On with Ron. And I am Pasta Jardula for Johnny Tsunami. We're going to get on out, and then
Bye,
we're going to
guys.
come back in. Lauren Steiner has a little stuff for you, Bernie treats,
About
Bernie
the Burn
fans. The Burn app. We'll see you soon. Like, share, and subscribe. Combo out.
All right, so you closing it off? Because I wanted this to stay on my stream.
Yeah, you can
Oh, yeah, we close it off. on
Okay,
our
so
stream.
guys, pertinent to what we were saying, the only way Bernie's going to win, because you could see the mainstream media has been really smearing him. And because of all these candidates, he's not really getting a chance to shine. So what it's going to take is one-on-one conversations. So what we want to talk about right now, and why everybody is holding these debate watch parties across the country, is what we need to do. And this is the campaign's plan. Now, this is not, you can do a lot more than the campaign's plan, but it's just my obligation to tell you right now what the campaign wants you to do if you want to get Bernie Sanders elected. And like it was